It's coming up to 12 noon and breaking news here on the live desk this lunchtime. The BBC Director General, Tim Davie, has revealed that the corporation has now paused its own investigation into allegations surrounding one of its top presenters to allow the Met Police to start its own inquiries.
Mr Davie said that the move was at the Met's request. We do hope to be talking to our Home Affairs correspondent, Mark White, who is at New Broadcasting House. We will go to him very, very shortly. But let's just bring you up to date with this breaking news. And GB News understands that the Met Police has asked the BBC to pause their investigation while they look into a possible criminal case. Tim Davie has also said it is a complex and difficult situation when it comes to how to handle these allegations.
Well, the corporation says it will be publishing a timeline of the events as it understands and will examine the way in which complaints to the corporation are so-called red flagged. Of course, it is the case that earlier the Prime Minister said the BBC allegations were shocking and concerning, but had been reassured, he said, from the BBC that the processes it was undertaking were vigorous and swift. But let's get more now with Mark White, who's been listening to what the Director General has been saying. And Mark, the significance is that the Met Police appear now to be back in the driving seat.
Well, I think it's a continuation of the situation that we found ourselves in yesterday with the statement from the Metropolitan Police that they were effectively scoping out the allegations that have been made to see whether it crosses that threshold into potential criminality. But what's new in this is the confirmation from the Director General that the Met have asked them to pause their own investigation here at the BBC while that scoping exercise continues, because clearly if it does become a criminal investigation, that will have to be parked and continued on another day. The criminal investigation would take priority precedence here, but no indication as yet that it will meet the threshold for a criminal inquiry. Another key line that's come out of this news briefing, which, as I say, was all about the annual report on the corporation, but had been absolutely consumed by this current scandal. The other line of importance to emerge is confirmation from the BBC that the presenter at the centre of these allegations was not spoken to by BBC investigators or anyone from management until the 6th of July, the day before these allegations were then splashed all over the Sun newspaper the following day, on the Friday of last week. Now, what the BBC and Tim Davie say in relation to that is that they had received an initial complaint, but they assessed that complaint not to have crossed the threshold into possible criminality. However, they did say that they believed this was a serious complaint. They say that they then tried to make contact again with the complainant, family members of the young person at the centre of the allegations, but that a phone call on the 6th of June, I think it was, to a family member, to the mobile number that was provided, did not connect. However, after that one attempt, it seems that the BBC did not make any overt attempt to contact the family again until, of course, the allegations surfaced on the 6th of July, a month later. So some real questions, I think, for the BBC to answer here. Also, some very significant information coming through from the BBC in terms of the timeline. And if I could go through the timeline of events that they are now telling us. They say that on the 18th of May, the complainant, a family member, attended a BBC building We believe it was this building here, New Broadcasting House, where they sought to make a complaint about the behaviour of a BBC presenter. Then on the 19th of May, the complainant contacted BBC Audience Services. The details of this contact were referred to the BBC's Corporate Investigations team. On the 19th of May, the BBC say, Corporate Investigations assessed the information contained in the complaint provided from Audience Services. That assessment was made that the basis of the information provided did not include an allegation of criminality, but nonetheless merited further investigation. They say that on the 19th of May, the BBC's Corporate Investigations team emailed the complainant stating how seriously the BBC takes the issue and seeking additional information to verify the claims being made. There was no response, apparently, to that email contact, according to the BBC in their timeline.
Yeah.
You want to ask me a question, Mark?
Yeah, I was going to say, we've got this assertion from Rishi Sunak that he's being told that the claims are being investigated swiftly and rigorously. I wonder now how that ties in with the fact we're now learning that the BBC only spoke to the presenter directly on the 6th of July, when this all began back in May.
Yeah, I mean, it's a key question, and it's definitely an awkward question for BBC management here. They are trying to explain it away by the suggestion that the information that they received did not point to an issue of criminality that they believed was being alleged, but nonetheless they acknowledged themselves that what was being alleged was a serious allegation. Now, given that it was a serious allegation, why, as you say, did we have to wait until actually the Sun newspaper was about to publish those allegations before the presenter at the centre of the allegations was spoken to? Let me just continue with the timeline, if that's okay, Mark. On the 19th of May again, it says that checks were also made to verify the identity of the complainant. This is a standard procedure to confirm that the complainant is the person they say they are. Then it jumps forward onto the 6th of June. Having received no response to the email referenced above, a phone call was made. That's what we've discussed already, which was provided, the number provided by the complainant, by the BBC's Corporation Investigations team. This call, we're told, did not connect. No indication as to whether any subsequent calls were made. We assume from that no subsequent calls were made, or surely they would have detailed that. They say following these attempts to make contact with the complainant, the Corporate Investigations team were due to return to the matter in the coming weeks. No additional attempts to contact the complainant were made after the 6th of June. However, the case remained open throughout. Then they say, of course, on the 6th of July, the Sun newspaper informed them about the very serious allegations, which the BBC management say clearly the Sun allegations did point to potential criminality. At that point, they say they spoke to the presenter at the centre of these allegations.
Mark, what's also interesting in light of us looking at this timeline is that now we understand Tim Davie has asked the corporation's chief operating officer to assess whether the broadcaster's protocols and procedures are appropriate in light of allegations made against one of its presenters.
Yes, I mean, clearly the BBC is in defence mode, of course, because of the inevitable questions about how this initial complaint seems to have been very slow in the official process to have been worked on, with, now we know, just one call back to the complainant, an email, of course, earlier, a day or so after the initial complaint complaint was made, which they got no response to, but then just one phone call after that, and weeks that went by with seemingly nothing further done, as far as we can ascertain, by the investigators. And yes, Tim Davey is saying that the way in which complaints are flagged up will be looked at again to ensure that all of those structures and procedures are in place and operating properly. We are still in the early stages of a very active investigation into allegations of potential criminality. So, of course, in tandem with that are the questions about how the complaint was dealt with. But the fact is, the BBC can't do too much about that at the moment because they have been asked to pause all of their investigations until the Met can come back with something definitive on whether they will actually launch a criminal investigation.
Mark, thank you very much for taking us through all that from New Broadcasting House. Of course, those details just coming through from the Director General. But let's reflect, it is, of course, also the annual report. So the Director General was hoping to speak to reporters about that particular issue, of course, with all the salaries of all the top stars.
GBNews' national reporter Theo Chikomba is here. And a certain Gary Lineker has topped the list yet again.
Yet again, as we've heard from Mark, there are lots going on at the BBC today, but this annual report comes out every single year, 240-something pages looking at how the BBC has performed in the last 12 months, from governance to finance to some of the projects that they're working on. And you also get some case studies from chief executives explaining what's been happening. And, of course, everyone wants to know who's on that list. We might be able to show you the list now as well, some of those top 10 stars. Gary Lineker is, of course, at the top. He works on Match of the Day, FA Cup, some of the big set pieces when it comes to sport. Alan Shearer's on there, Stephen Nolan, who works in Northern Ireland, Fiona Bruce, Stephen Wright, and so many others who made that list. Lots of money there, but of course people will be asking, as they pay the licence fee, who's on that list and what value do they add?
These are bands where, so we haven't got the exact salary as such. These are the bands, but I'm just wondering, have we got any indication what sort of increase they've had year on year? Because obviously there's a huge debate going on about public service salaries, with the government trying to keep a lid on inflation.
Yeah, that's right. So in this report, it doesn't give you how they've progressed in terms of salaries.
How interesting, yeah.
However, what tends to happen with these bands is that some of these people work on various projects throughout the year. So they might not just work on, for example, Gary Lineker, might not just do Match of the Day.
There might be other programmes as well.
Exactly. So it varies. So one year he might do lots of projects and others he might do less.
Has the BBC said anything about, should we say, value for money, or that, you know, this is fair payment? Because they're pretty eye-watering sums for the public to actually look at, you know, what they're paying in their licence fee, for instance.
Well, if you look at their report, they'll speak highly of the work that they've been doing in the last 12 months, and a lot of it is saying we are moving in the right direction. Things like environmental sustainability, their net zero targets, some of their commercial operations, and how their platforms are performing, such as BBC Signs, iPlay and that kind of thing. So they've said they are heading in the right direction, and of course salaries is a huge area, but in terms of whether they will say they add value, of course they will say they are doing the right thing.
And actually some people on that list, Steve Wright, for example, they actually don't work for the BBC anymore anyway.
No, he left.
Well, I think he does a Sunday programme, doesn't he?
Well, OK, not in the form that he was.
Yeah, it did change last year, and that.
Yes, because he had that weekday afternoon programme, didn't he? And his
did.
earnings will have dropped because he's moved.
Exactly. So that's another example of people moving around. But of course, he did leave that show he was doing on Radio 2.
And have we had any indication or response from the presenters? Because clearly there was a lot of unhappiness about their salaries going public, and the fact that, for instance, in the commercial sector, in ITV, it may be that many of those presenters have got their salaries under wraps.
Well, as you can imagine, with what's going on at the moment, many presenters are either not saying much, but in previous years, there have been some who say, I guess it's part of the nature of the job, and these have to come out. But, of course, on a day like today, I imagine in the office, everyone will be looking around to see who's making that list.
And interestingly as well, there's some big BBC stars such as Michael McIntyre, Tess Daly. They're not on the list because they're paid through production
Company, yeah.
companies.
Yes, so there's the commercial arm of the BBC, which deals with the commercial operations. So those salaries from those people wouldn't be on this list. So you might have programmes like EastEnders, Strictly Come Dancing, and so many others, which I imagine some of those stars will be getting maybe some sums like this, but they would not feature in this annual report that we see year on year.
And in terms of outside sort of, should we say, policing of the corporation, has the Director General given any indication as to whether they're going to, you know, bend to more external review in terms of what they're paying and how they're paying this money?
Well, it's something that they try to address every single year. In terms of what's going to happen, well, we've seen figures like this almost every year. Whether that's going to change, it's not quite clear. He hasn't indicated that. But
Right.
what we did see last year is that a lot of services in the BBC are being streamlined, so less in terms of operations. But when it comes to stars, it seems as though they're still getting paid in these ballpark figures.
A pretty penny, I think, is the phrase that some would use, yeah. Theo, thank you very much indeed. Coming up, questions as to whether President Biden is to relent to Rishi Sunak's pressure getting Ukraine into NATO as soon as possible. President Zelensky's been talking about that. We'll tell you what he's had to say. That's coming live from Vilnius in a moment.
I'm Alex Deakin and welcome along to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Another day of heavy showers across the country. Some big downpours in a few spots. Most of us seeing some sunny spells, so a good chance there'll be some rainbows around. Low pressure has been dominating. This weather front brought quite a lot of heavy rain across the south yesterday evening. It's been fizzling out, but still providing quite a lot of cloud. Showers already over Wales, northern England. They'll get heavier through the day, as they will across northern Scotland. Slow-moving thunderstorms here could cause some problems with a lot of rain falling in a short space of time. We should see some sunny spells developing, particularly for Northern Ireland. 20 degrees here, maybe up into the low 20s across the southeast. But for most, it feels cool with the brisk breeze, which will at least move the showers through this evening. Lighter winds across northern Scotland means the slow-moving downpours will continue here well into the night, and we'll see more wet weather returning to Northern Ireland through the night as well. But for a good chunk of England and Wales, it will turn dry and clear, temperatures mostly holding up at about 13 or 14. As for Wednesday, it's another day of sunshine and showers. It'll be a brighter start across East Anglia and the southeast. Good chance of a sunny start to Wednesday, but then the showers will get going once more, especially over northern England. Again, parts of northern Scotland. More tomorrow, probably for Northern Ireland. But a chance of a drier afternoon across Wales and southwest England. And again, temperatures mostly in the high teens and low 20s.
Welcome back to the live desk. Let's take you straight to Vilnius in Lithuania. The NATO summit has just got underway. They've sat down for the start of the conference, and already it seems that it's got pretty fiery. President Zelensky hitting out at NATO for what he sees as a delay to making his country a member, saying it was unprecedented and absurd not to have a time frame for Ukraine's membership. Uncertainty is weakness, he said. I'll openly discuss this, while NATO boss Jens Stoltenberg insisted Ukraine would get a clear message, a positive message on membership.
Yeah, there seems to be quite a lot of disagreement going on because the UK wants Ukraine membership to be fast-tracked. But the Baltic states, Eastern European nations, they want the alliance to make clear what more conditions Ukraine needs to meet. And then other allies, including the US and Germany, they are much more cautious. They want Kyiv to tackle corruption and ensure civilian control over the military first. They're also worried that it could all lead to NATO being dragged into the war, which they absolutely do not want. They are supplying the weaponry, but they are not and will not put boots on the ground.
Interesting seating arrangement. There's Jens Stoltenberg, but you could see Rishi Sunak there next to President Biden. Of course, they had that very brief meeting in Downing Street before the president flew off. I think we can bring in our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's in Vilnius for us. Interesting noises off, if you like, Darren, especially from President Zelensky on the pathway, I think they're calling it, for Ukraine's NATO membership.
Yeah, indeed. In many ways, NATO are at least committed to and are united on the prospect of Ukraine joining the alliance at some stage. That is what they have reaffirmed today, if you like. They initially suggested it way back in 2008. But, as you guys have rightly pointed out, there are somewhat divisions on when and how precisely that can happen. It is clear, as you say, some of the Baltic states, Poland potentially as well, want to see this process expedited. Clearly President Zelensky does. Others are being more cautious. Frankly, though, the bottom line is this is not going to happen while Ukraine is involved in an active war with Russia. Now, it's 500 days old, this war. There is no end in prospect to it. And so there is no real, at the moment, prospect of Ukraine joining NATO. And that has led President Zelensky, who's on his way here to Vilnius, to put out a pretty angry tweet this afternoon, condemning effectively NATO leaders. He says that it seems that there is no readiness neither to invite Ukraine to NATO nor to make it a member of the alliance. This means that a window of opportunity is being left to bargain Ukraine's membership in NATO in negotiations with Russia. And for Russia, this means motivation to continue its terror. He added that uncertainty is weakness, and will openly discuss this at the summit. So his suggestion is that if it doesn't happen now, or it doesn't happen soon, that frankly, if it gets to negotiations for the end of the war with Russia, that Russia will push for NATO to exclude Ukrainian membership as part of a deal, and that NATO may well cave on that. So that's where his concern is. I spoke to the Prime Minister on the way over here. Yep. Again, he would argue, in principle, NATO is very keen for Ukraine to become a member, but it is simply not possible, as I say, while you've got that active red-hot war currently taking place.
And the problem being Article 5, of course, if a NATO member is attacked, is on all of those countries. So therefore, if anything was to happen in terms of Russia launching on Ukraine again, that would bring the whole of NATO into the conflict.
Yeah, indeed, and we know that there's been massive concern about the escalation of this conflict. In many ways, Mark, you could argue, effectively, there is somewhat of a proxy war taking place in the sense that it is NATO members, the alliance, who are meeting here, as you say, over 30 leaders who've been supplying, on the whole, Ukraine largely with its weapons supply. The United States at the weekend saying that it will provide cluster bombs to Ukraine. So to a large degree, you know, the support, the military, tangible support on the ground for Ukraine is largely there. However, you're also right in pointing out that clearly leaders cannot allow Ukraine to become a member of NATO because it would activate Article 5 and would mean effectively all-out war between the Western Alliance and Russia, with potentially all the devastating consequences beyond the borders for NATO members. Now, NATO will be pleased at least that they've managed to get President Erdogan of Turkey last night to allow Sweden to become a full member. it was possible that could get held up. But in the end, they managed to strike a deal last night. But today is a reminder that there are divisions within the alliance, as one would expect, but also that they're going to have to go eye to eye, face to face with President Zelensky in the next 24 hours and explain to him, frankly, why they won't allow him to become a member of NATO, even though he's desperate for it to happen. Not today, but yesterday. He would say it should have happened years ago.
Dan McCaffrey, our political editor, thank you very much. Let's show you some pictures from a little earlier where Rishi Sunak and President Biden met each other for, well, the second time in 2 days at this NATO summit. And as Darren was saying, and we were just discussing, you know, the most important issue is about NATO expansion, but also Rishi Sunak wants to persuade member states to meet this goal of spending 2% of GDP on defence. And so far, only 11 of the 31 members do that now. And actually, France, Germany, Italy and Spain, they are among the members that did not do that this year.
Interesting, too, the Prime Minister was then challenged by some of the reporters following suggestions that our army cuts particularly could put that into question, saying that the UK should be incredibly proud of leading role it was playing in global security. And indeed, we're learning that the first bilateral meeting that Rishi Sunak will have is with the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, of course, who has just acceded to Sweden joining NATO. So it's a pretty busy summit. We'll update you with all the latest there from Vilnius.
Well, let's speak to political commentator and former army officer Colonel Stuart Crawford. Thanks for talking to us this afternoon. As we were saying, plenty to be discussed at this NATO summit. Do you see where President Zelensky is coming from in that strongly worded statement of his?
Yes, good afternoon. I think Darren McGarvey's report covered almost all the bases there and was very comprehensive. Zelensky's frustration is not that Ukraine cannot immediately join NATO for all the reasons that have been discussed, because it would lead to immediate war via Article 5 with Russia. But I think that he's really frustrated that there seems to be no timeline for Ukraine's accession. And remember, it was agreed that Ukraine would become a member of NATO way back in 2008. So that's a long time to be waiting.
Yeah, they want this pathway, I think they've called it. So even though there might be an acknowledgement that, of course, this can't take place while the sort of counter-offensive is underway and the warfare on the ground, that Ukraine wants to have some kind of definite timetable put in place.
Yes, indeed. And I think that if and when the war comes to an end, and all wars come to an end eventually, then perhaps Ukraine will accede to NATO very quickly, because without that, they're open once again to attack from Russia when Russia regroups and rearms. So I think it's perfectly understandable that President Zelensky wants some sort of pathway, some sort of timeline that will tell him and the people of Ukraine when they might be able to join NATO and therefore secure their future.
And, of course, a lot of the sort of activity is the signals being sent to Putin from this summit in Vilnius. What do you think of the significance of this deal with Ankara, brokered by Jens Stoltenberg, where Turkey now has acceded to Sweden joining, as well as, of course, Finland now a member too?
Yes, I think that's very important. As I understand it, I don't think Hungary has yet agreed to that. However, it looks likely that Sweden will join NATO very quickly. And the important point of that is that if you look at the map, it means the Baltic Sea will essentially be surrounded by NATO members when Sweden joins. And Russia only has access to the Baltic Sea via St. Petersburg and also in Kaliningrad. So to all intents of purposes, the Baltic Sea will be denied to Russia, which is quite a big blow strategically.
Yeah. I also want to ask you about what Rishi Sunak was saying about the government's investment in defence. These suggestions that Britain could lose influence because of potential cuts to the army. I mean, it does sound a little bit daft, doesn't it? The state the world is in at the moment, making defence cuts.
Yes, it's completely counterintuitive. The UK is meant to be able to deploy a warfighting division in the field, but at the moment we would be hard pressed to produce a brigade, which is about a third of the size of a warfighting division. And while we are cutting troops, obviously the difficulties in Europe are increasing, and we're still only spending about 2.5% of our GDP on military equipment, compared to Poland, which may now be spending as much as 5%. So we've got a lot of catching up to do. But the real problem is that as our military becomes smaller, our influence in European defence issues diminishes greatly.
Stuart, thank you very much indeed for that. And of course, we'll keep everyone updated from Vilnius as that summit gets underway. Thank you very much indeed. Coming up, what will the government do on migration after the illegal migration bill suffers 20 defeats in the Lords? It's now back to the Commons. We'll update you on that. But first, the latest headlines coming up with Aaron.
Hi there, it's 12:31. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The BBC says it's been asked to pause its investigation into allegations against a suspended presenter while police look into a possible criminal case. Director General Tim Davie told reporters he hasn't personally spoken to the presenter concerned and declined to confirm whether they've offered to resign. He said the corporation received an initial complaint on the 19th of May. At that time, however, no allegations of criminal activity were made. When asked if the presenter may return to work, Mr Davie said the process must be allowed to run fairly and transparently. In other news, the BBC has published details of its highest paid stars as part of its annual report. Gary Lineker remains the corporation's top earner, taking home more than £1.35 million. Zoe Ball is the highest paid female presenter, pocketing more than £980,000. The Prime Minister is at the NATO summit in Lithuania, where leaders are being pressed to make guarantees over Ukraine's bid to join the military alliance. President Zelensky says it would be absurd not to set a time frame for membership over the next 2 days. Rishi Sunak is in favour of Ukraine joining NATO, but not while the war against Russia continues. He's also pushing all countries to commit 2% of their budget to defence spending, in line with an agreement made by members in 2008. And the government will attempt to get its illegal migration bill through the House of Commons after a number of concessions. Changes include limiting the detention periods of unaccompanied children and pregnant women, and the legislation will no longer be used retrospectively against people already in the UK. The changes have been recommended by peers after the draft bill suffered 20 defeats in the House of Lords. And mortgage rates have hit their highest level in 15 years, surpassing figures seen in the aftermath of last year's mini-budget. The average rate on a 2-year fixed deal is now 6.66%, the highest level since the financial crisis of 2008. Lenders have been questioned by MPs on the Treasury Committee today. The Bank of England raised its benchmark rate to 5% last month in an effort to bring down inflation. And you can get more on all those stories on our website, gbnews.com.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Alex Deakin and welcome along to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Another day of heavy showers across the country. Some big downpours in a few spots. Most of us seeing some sunny spells, so a good chance there'll be some rainbows around. Low pressure has been dominating. This weather front brought quite a lot of heavy rain across the south yesterday evening. It's been fizzling out, but still providing quite a lot of cloud. Showers already over Wales, northern England. They'll get heavier through the day, as they will across northern Scotland. Slow-moving thunderstorms here could cause some problems with a lot of rain falling in a short space of time. We should see some sunny spells developing, particularly for Northern Ireland. 20 degrees here, maybe up into the low 20s across the southeast. But for most, it feels cool with the brisk breeze, which will at least move the showers through this evening. Lighter winds across northern Scotland means the slow-moving downpours will continue here well into the night, and we'll see more wet weather returning to Northern Ireland through the night as well. But for a good chunk of England and Wales, it will turn dry and clear, temperatures mostly holding up at about 13 or 14. As for Wednesday, it's another day of sunshine and showers. It'll be a brighter start across East Anglia and the southeast. Good chance of a sunny start to Wednesday, but then the showers will get going once more, especially over northern England. Again, parts of northern Scotland. More tomorrow, probably for Northern Ireland. Better chance of a drier afternoon across Wales and southwest England. And again, temperatures mostly in the high teens and low 20s.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome back to the live desk here on GB News. Wages have risen for millions of workers in the UK, according to official figures from the Office for National Statistics.
Which you might think is good news, but it's the highest growth rate on record. Not great news, of course, for what may happen with interest rates and therefore mortgages. Even more pressure, of course, on the Bank of England to raise the base rate. It's meeting, of course, next month. Let's get more from Westminster and our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. And Liam, of course, we had both the Chancellor and the Governor of the Bank of England at this important Mansion House sort of dinner last night and warning about the dangers of wage inflation. And there we are, the day after they've been proved right.
We did indeed hear from both the Chancellor and the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, last night at the Mansion House, doing a kind of double act, a display of unity. The Bank of England, of course, under enormous pressure because the inflation target in this country set by the Treasury is 2%, and our inflation on the latest numbers is still 8.7%. And let's have a look at those wage numbers that you mentioned, Mark and Pip. Ordinarily, the fact that wages are going up strongly would be a cause of celebration, but there are two reasons why they aren't celebrating, because they're going up by less than the rate of inflation, and there's concern that will lead to more inflation still. So what the numbers show is that between March and May, those 3 months compared to the same 3 months in 2022, private sector pay was up 7.7%. 4/5 of us work in the private sector. That's the fastest rate of increase on record. Public sector pay, the 20% of people working in the public sector, schools, healthcare, and so on, their pay went up 5.8%, and that's the fastest since 2001. And when he stood up at the Mansion House, a big ceremonial hall in the City of London opposite the Bank of England, Bank Governor Andrew Bailey said that rates of pay increase at this level, even though they're less than inflation, even though they're going down in real terms, are, quotes, simply not compatible with inflation currently for almost 5 times target. And that's why the chances are, given these wage numbers, unfortunately, when the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee next meets to set interest rates in early August, they're likely to put rates up again from 5% where they currently are.
And of course, as we've indicated, the gap, if you like, between the private and public sector pay deals and salaries as well, because we've got the additional aspect now of this independent pay review bodies coming in on teachers, on health services, and so on. You know, they're talking about, what, 6.5% for the teachers, yet more pressure via the public service as well as the private sector.
We've got an awful lot of the public sector on strike, haven't we? A lot of public sector unions, they became, certainly their leadership, more militant during lockdown. And I would say, Mark, being realistic, that 5.8% public sector pay increase, that's on average. A lot of the public sector workers who are on strike, they're going to want even more than that. They're going to want a number that's closer to the rate of inflation, which is currently 8.7%. There is a silver lining here. The silver lining is, as the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey said last night, and I do agree with him on this, he thinks that inflation will, when it does start to fall, it will start falling rapidly. So we got the next numbers out coming in a few weeks' time. I do think inflation is going to start falling, but still, we got this gap between inflation, 8.7%, where the government is setting these wage bargaining outcomes for the public sector. Those two have to come together if we're going to be able to get beyond these really damaging public sector strikes that, of course, are causing a lot of the public a lot of hassle during these summer months.
Let's also talk mortgages, because there's yet more pressure on homeowners. 2-year fixed mortgage rates have risen to the highest level since the 2008 financial crisis. A typical 2-year deal has risen to 6.66%.
It's unbelievable, Pip. Just a few months ago, you could get a 2-year fixed-rate mortgage for 2% or 3%, maybe 4%. Now, as you say, on average, it's 6.6% plus. And for a lot of people with higher loans to value, borrowing a lot of money, who can't put down a big deposit, first-time buyers, particularly those who aren't lucky enough to be able to rely on the bank of mum and dad, as over half of first-time buyers are now here in London and the South East. Around a third of first-time buyers across the country. If you can't rely on extra cash from your money, you're going to be paying a lot more than 6.6% for that first mortgage, because your loan to value will be higher. This is why house prices are coming down, because people can't afford to put in big bids, because they can't afford the mortgage payments to finance them. And this is the difficulty for first-time buyers, kids trying to get on the housing ladder. Even if house prices come down a bit, and they are now coming down a bit, if you have to pay more to borrow a certain amount of money because interest rates are higher, it doesn't make houses more affordable. This is a major problem, this conundrum of interest rates, inflation, mortgage costs. This is going to dominate politics between now and the run-up to the next general election next autumn. In the end, in my view, economics wins.
Indeed, and headaches for those politicians behind you, of course, in Westminster as a result of all that. Liam, thank you very much indeed for updating us. More reaction as it comes through, but let's tell you about a ringleader of a people smuggling group due to be sentenced today for the manslaughter of 39 Vietnamese migrants, including children, found dead in a lorry in Essex in October 2019.
The migrants paid the smuggling gang for a VIP journey where they was transported to the Belgian border in taxis before they were put on the lorry which travelled to Essex. They all suffocated to death in the container. Our London reporter Lisa Hartle is at the Old Bailey. Lisa, this was absolutely horrific case and we all remember it from, well, what's 4 years ago now?
Yeah, exactly. So it was last month when Mario Strachicci pleaded guilty here at the Old Bailey to the manslaughter of those 39 people, men, women and children, whose bodies were all found in the back of a lorry container in Essex on the 23rd of October 2019. The bodies of the Vietnamese nationals had been transported from Belgium to Purfleet and they died after running out of air in temperatures that said they believe reached 38.5 degrees Celsius. And the 50-year-old and alleged leader of a people smuggling gang was found and arrested by police in Romania in August last year. He was charged with manslaughter, but also charged with the conspiracy to assist unlawful immigration. Other people have been prosecuted for their parts in the deaths. In 2021, 4 men were jailed for their parts in their roles in the deaths of the victims, 2 of whom were just 15 years old. 2 other men were convicted in 2020, while lorry driver Maurice Robinson and haulage boss Ronan Hughes admitted manslaughter. The court was previously told how this was a long-running operation, with people smugglers set to make as much as £1 million in October 2019 alone. And in June, at Strachicci's trial, the prosecution said that they found it hard to believe that he had no monetary gain from this, despite them not being able to pinpoint any cash actually being handed over. The fee for the journey was said to be between £10,000 and £13,000 for a so-called VIP route that brought them to the UK. And between May 2018 and October 2019, a total of 7 people smuggling trips were discovered, though the court believes there were many more. And it wasn't until the bodies of those 39 victims were found in October 2019 that the trips stopped.
Lisa, thank you for that. Back to you, of course, as we get that sentencing there at the Old Bailey. Thank you very much indeed. Now, let's update you the latest figures we're getting from the Home Office on the migrants coming across the Channel. The provisional total now up to 13,110 so far this year, the latest figures showing 338 people making the journey this Monday in some 6 boats. So that's 1,677 arrivals recorded in just 4 days.
Well, it comes as MPs will vote today on changes made to the illegal migration bill by the House of Lords after it suffered 20 defeats in Parliament's upper chamber.
In response, the government offering concessions on safeguarding for children and pregnant women to try to ensure the bill's passage through Parliament, including the immigration bail, as it's called, after 8 days rather than the current proposed 28.
Well, let's get more on this by speaking to GB News' Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood. Tom, it did sound like they wanted to get this illegal migration bill through before the summer recess, but now Downing Street seems to not be wanting to name a deadline for the passage of this bill.
Well, it's only ever been speculation that the government has been desperate to get this piece of legislation done in the next 2 weeks. Of course, the government itself has never said that that has been a formal deadline, but behind the scenes, that has been the expectation that the government is rushing to get this passed by the end of next week and receive royal assent before Parliament breaks up for the summer recess. And that is potentially why we've seen a great deal of horse trading over the last couple of days. Last night, new amendments being published by the government that in effect accepts 5 of the 20 amendments made by the Lords, rejecting 15 of them outright and in part or in whole accepting 5 of them. You ran through some of those examples just now to do with pregnant women, to do with children, to do with the length of time someone can be detained up until they must be released or processed, and indeed there's a further one that's been hitting the papers as well, this rejection of retrospective measures within the legislation. It's being reported that means that 10,000 people who have arrived by small boats in the last few months since the legislation was introduced, the time period between the introduction and expected royal assent of the legislation, instead of the legislation applying to those 10,000 people, it will not, meaning they will be processed rather than deported. So those are some of the concessions the government has made to the House of Lords, and it will hope, therefore, that this bill can pass both houses by the end of next week. Although, as you say, the government not wanting to put itself as a hostage to fortune, not wanting to say publicly that that's its deadline.
And Tom, looking at the bigger picture, I gather the Prime Minister speaking to all the reporters on that RAF plane going over to Vilnius for the NATO summit, saying that the government's plan to stop the migrants arriving unlawfully was working, although he recognised that the crossings would increase over the summer. You know, latest figures, suggestions Friday to Monday, another 1,677. I mean, if that's a policy working, well, what would happen if it wasn't working?
Well, certainly, and it does seem perhaps a bit unwise of the Prime Minister to have a few weeks ago stood in Dover making that speech hailing his plan as working, crossings at that point down 20% on the year before. As we now have seen in the last few weeks, the crossings have risen and risen and risen, reaching that trend of last year again. Of course, the argument from the government and what the Prime Minister will say he was saying is that if they hadn't made some of these changes, the deal with Albania, for example, which has shown numbers from Albania have fallen by, I believe, 90%. His argument would be if those changes hadn't happened, the numbers would be even higher than they are now, although, of course, that is going to be disputed, and whether or not that term working can be fully applied is one for debate. But again, the government would no doubt say in response to that, that is why this illegal migration bill, which of course has not yet passed Parliament, being voted on today and does need to pass both houses, the government would say that's why it's so important to pass.
Tom, it doesn't look like the Prime Minister has got the confidence of former Home Secretary Priti Patel. She has been tweeting, saying the key pillars of the government's flagship illegal migration bill have been abandoned.
Yes, and Priti Patel has been very critical of the way that the government has been handling things for some time now. She has tweeted that it's not so easy to get migration down. Of course, her time as Home Secretary also saw the numbers rise, although the rhetoric remain strong. This is a vulnerability for the government. Of course, the Prime Minister made it one of his 5 pledges to quote-unquote stop the boats. Although we haven't quite heard from the government if they want to reach that number to be 0, or the time frame in which we can measure their progress towards that goal of quote-unquote stopping the boats. But the government does say that the changes to the legislation, the amendments from the House of Lords, where of course they do not have a majority, that they have accepted, aren't fundamental to the bill as perhaps Priti Patel would contain.
Tom, thanks very much indeed.
Now, you might remember yesterday we were telling you about more than 180,000 holidaymakers who've been hit by EasyJet's summer flight cancellations. You could be one of them.
Well, most of the cancellations at Gatwick, the airline saying 95% of those affected had their flights rebooked, but that left 9,000 unfortunates yet to receive a replacement flight or indeed any compensation.
Well, we spoke to Andy Samu here on the live desk. He was stuck for rather a long time at Budapest airport. This is what he had to say.
We're given a hotel, but many of the passengers were asked to sleep 2 to a room, which I've not seen before. It's quite unusual to see that. We've had further disruption this morning because some parents with their children have been given seats on different rows from their children. And we received a refreshment voucher, which is worth £2.55 in local currency. And I've tried 4 shops and none of them will take it.
So where is he now? What did he get for £2.55? Andy can join us now. Andy, where are you?
I'm in Canary Wharf, back in my office, thankfully.
Woohoo! Amazing!
It looks remarkably similar to Budapest Airport in terms of the ceiling there. So tell us about your odyssey to get back home.
Well, we were supposed to fly at 2, but fortunately we flew at 4:15, which meant I could have a call with yourselves. We got on the flight. It was nice. It wasn't full. Some of the passengers clearly had chosen another alternative way to get home, but we weren't offered refreshments again when we were on the flight, which was rather strange, bearing in mind we were over 5.5 hours in the airport without any refreshments. So we did land. Just before we landed, there was a plane in the taxiing space that our plane was supposed to be in, and the captain finally became distressed as well and notified us that we had to wait another half an hour to get into the bay. But we got home, so that's the most important thing.
So even the captain was fed up then?
Yes.
And have you been told anything about any possible recompense, or is it a case of, sorry?
Well, we did receive a letter at 1 a.m. Just after the flight was cancelled, which said that there was exceptional circumstances, as I mentioned yesterday. Since then, several of the customers and myself have written to a company called Air Help, who specialise in compensation. They have also come back to me and a few customers saying that they won't be able to proceed with the claim because they say it looks like your flight was disrupted due to operational problems at the airport. These may include emergency landings, runway issues, or air traffic control restrictions. Now, as far as we were told by the captain, though, air traffic control wasn't the reason that we were grounded. It was actually the security check of the plane running out. So EasyJet finally got in touch, though, half an hour ago.
Oh, and?
So we are, yes. I don't know how many of the customers they're in touch with. They have been in touch with me. They have told me that they're not aware of the full incident and they're looking into it.
There we go. Breaking news on the live desk. Yeah, great to hear. Happy outcome. And, of course, you might still have your voucher on you to spend next time in your Budapest airport. Andy, thanks very much indeed for your time.
We should just say, in fairness to EasyJet, a comment from them, they say the whole industry is seeing challenging conditions this summer with more constrained airspace due to the war in Ukraine.
Even so, we're flying back to the Lithuanian capital in Vilnius shortly. The NATO leaders sitting down will be telling you what they're talking about. Stay with us.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Alex Deakin and welcome along to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Another day of heavy showers across the country. Some big downpours in a few spots. Most of us seeing some sunny spells, so a good chance there'll be some rainbows around. Low pressure has been dominating. This weather front brought quite a lot of heavy rain across the south yesterday evening. It's been fizzling out, but still providing quite a lot of cloud. Showers already over Wales, northern England. They'll get heavier through the day, as they will across northern Scotland. Slow-moving thunderstorms here could cause some problems with a lot of rain falling in a short space of time. We should see some sunny spells developing, particularly for Northern Ireland. 20 degrees here, maybe up into the low 20s across the southeast. But for most, it feels cool with the brisk breeze, which will at least move the showers through this evening. Lighter winds across northern Scotland means the slow-moving downpours will continue here well into the night, and we'll see more wet weather returning to Northern Ireland through the night as well. But for a good chunk of England and Wales, it will turn dry and clear, temperatures mostly holding up at about 13 or 14. As for Wednesday, it's another day of sunshine and showers. It'll be a brighter start across East Anglia and the southeast. Good chance of a sunny start to Wednesday, but then the showers will get going once more, especially over northern England. Again, parts of northern Scotland. More tomorrow, probably for Northern Ireland. But a chance of a drier afternoon across Wales and southwest England. And again, temperatures mostly in the high teens and low 20s.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The BBC reveals it only spoke to the presenter at the centre of allegations of paying a young person for sexually explicit photos almost 2 months after the complaint was first made.
Director General Tim Davie also admitted the BBC only made 2 attempts to contact the family over the same period of time. Their investigation is now on hold at the request of the Met Police.
All smiles as leaders gather in Vilnius for their NATO summit, but President Zelensky not happy, calling the lack of a time frame for Ukraine joining as absurd.
Plus, the row over his tweets about migration took the BBC off air. In return, the corporation paid Gary Lineker a salary of over £1 million. We'll be telling you much more about that, about who's in the money at the corporation very shortly. Before that, your headlines with Aaron.
Good afternoon, it's 2 minutes past 1. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The BBC says it's been asked to pause its investigation into allegations against a suspended presenter while police look into a possible criminal case. Director General Tim Davie told reporters he hasn't personally spoken to the presenter concerned and declined to confirm whether they've offered to resign. He says the corporation received an initial complaint on the 19th of May, which was very serious, but included no criminal allegations. When asked if the presenter may return to work, Mr Davie said the process must be allowed to run fairly and transparently. Well, separately, the BBC has published details of its highest paid stars as part of its annual report. Gary Lineker remains the corporation's top paid presenter, taking home more than £1.35 million. Zoe Ball's the highest paid female presenter, earning more than £980,000. The Prime Minister is at the NATO summit in Lithuania, where leaders are being pressed to make guarantees over Ukraine's bid to join the military alliance. President Zelensky says it would be absurd not to set a time frame for membership over the next 2 days. Now, Rishi Sunak's in favour of Ukraine joining NATO, but not while the war against Russia continues. And Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg says Ukraine will be given a clear and positive message.
I also expect that allies will send a clear and positive message on the path forward towards membership for Ukraine. I have proposed a package of 3 elements with more practical support with a multi-year program to ensure full interoperability between the Ukrainian forces and the NATO forces. This will move Ukraine closer to NATO.
Well, the government could face further hurdles when its illegal migration bill returns to the Commons later, despite a number of amendments. Concessions, including limiting the detention period of unaccompanied children and pregnant women, have been made to overcome safeguarding concerns. Another change will prevent people who've already entered the UK without permission from being removed retrospectively. A draft of the controversial bill suffered a record 20 defeats in the House of Lords. Mortgage rates have hit their highest level in 15 years, surpassing figures seen in the aftermath of last year's mini-budget. The average rate on a 2-year fixed deal is now 6.66%, the highest level since the financial crisis in 2008. Lenders have been questioned today by MPs on the Treasury Committee. The Bank of England raised its benchmark rate to 5% last month in an effort to bring down inflation, and Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says that remains the government's priority.
We will do what is necessary for as long as necessary to tackle inflation persistence and bring it back to the 2% target. Delivering sound money is our #1 focus. That means taking responsible decisions on public finances, including public sector pay, because more borrowing is itself inflationary.
Meanwhile, the pace of wage growth has risen again, prompting fears of a further hike in interest rates next month. Average weekly pay is 7.3% higher in the 3 months to May compared with last year, matching the joint highest figure since records began in 2001. The Office for National Statistics also revealed unemployment rose unexpectedly over the quarter to 4%. A teacher stabbed at a school in Tewkesbury in Gloucestershire yesterday is recovering well after being discharged from hospital. A teenage boy is being questioned on suspicion of attempted murder after teacher Jamie Sansom was stabbed in a secondary school corridor. Tewkesbury School says it's providing additional mental and emotional support for students and staff. The European Court of Human Rights has ruled the two-time Olympic champion Caster Semenya has been discriminated against by World Athletics. The 800-metre runner has a condition which means she produces higher levels of testosterone, and she was banned from competing after refusing to take drugs to lower her testosterone levels. Well, the court ruled this violated her human rights and that she hasn't been given sufficient safeguards, having made a complaint. Train fares could be reduced under a plan to encourage more competition on Britain's railways. New research says allowing multiple operators to run services on the same line leads to better services, newer trains and cheaper fares. Rail Partners, which represents private train companies, is calling for open access to allow more companies to compete for customers like in other European countries. This is GB News. More as it happens throughout the afternoon, but now it's back to Mark and Pip.
Aaron, thanks very much indeed, and welcome back to the live desk. So, the BBC Director General, Tim Davie, revealing that the corporation only tried to contact the family who made their complaint against the BBC presenter twice after the issue was first raised. Also, not speaking to the presenter themselves until 7 weeks after the complaint was first made, that happening on July the 6th.
Tim Davie also said it had halted its own investigation at the request of the Met Police as they launched their own inquiries. Our Home Affairs correspondent Mark White has been following all the latest developments. He is at New Broadcasting House. Good afternoon, Mark. So we have got a clearer picture now with this newly released timeline, which actually raises a lot more questions.
Yes, you're absolutely right. There are some serious questions now for BBC management to answer in the hours, days and weeks ahead, as well as, of course, the central allegations that are still being investigated, potentially forming the basis of a criminal investigation by the Metropolitan Police. They're involved in what they term a scoping exercise at the moment to see whether that criminal threshold has been reached in what has been alleged. While that is happening, the BBC have confirmed that their internal investigations have had to be paused. But what they did give us, you're right, is this timeline, and it's fascinating and worrying as well. On the day, they tell us that the complainant, a family member, attended a BBC building where they sought to make a complaint about the behaviour of a BBC presenter. Then they say on the 19th of May, the complainant then contacted BBC Audience Services. The details of that contact were then referred to the BBC's Corporate Investigations Unit. Again on the 19th of May, that Corporate Investigations Unit emailed the complainant to say just how seriously they take these investigations, these allegations, and also that they were looking for more in the way of information from the complainant. But they say that they got no reply from the complainant at that time. Then we effectively just jump on 2.5 weeks later to the 6th of June, where the BBC say that their investigations team, having got no reply to that initial email on the 19th of May, telephoned the contact number given by the complainant. That number or that call did not connect, according to what the BBC management say. Now, after that one phone call, no further attempts throughout this whole period of time, right up until the allegations were made by The Sun. No further phone calls were made, no other emails sent, no attempt to contact this family member, making what the BBC acknowledged themselves was a very serious allegation. Then jump forward again to the 6th of July, and this is the point where the Sun newspaper contacts the BBC and tells them that they have these very serious allegations that they're about to splash in the paper the very next day, the 7th of July. Only at that point, almost 2 months after the initial allegations were made, did a senior BBC manager speak to the BBC presenter at the centre of these allegations. So some very significant and serious questions, I think, for BBC management to answer. We haven't fully got their explanation as to what's gone on yet.
And particularly, Mark, as we've now got the Prime Minister involved, speaking to reporters as he was travelling to Vilnius. I mean, his analysis, shocking and concerning allegations, but then saying that the BBC had assured him that the investigation would be rigorous and swift. And one wonders about those two terms in terms of, you know, nothing happening in terms of talking to the presenter directly until the 6th of July.
Yeah, well, I mean, it may be rigorous and swift from here on in, but it's clear it was not rigorous or swift before we got to this point. In some explanation that Tim Davie gave as to why perhaps the presenter was not spoken to before the 6th of July, they say that the initial allegations made by the complainant did not include an allegation of criminality. However, they did say that they took the allegations, what was being alleged by that family member, very seriously. So given that, criminality aside, if they deem it to have been a very serious allegation, one might have thought that the presenter at the centre of the allegations would have been spoken to at some point in the almost 2 months since that initial allegation was made.
Mark, at New Broadcasting House for the moment, thank you very much indeed for updating us on that issue.
The BBC is also under the spotlight today over salaries.
Well, they've released the annual report, including the pay of top talent. Our national reporter, Thea Chikombo, is here with the facts and, well, some pretty eye-watering figures as well, one has to say.
They are indeed. Gary Lineker at the top of the list. He has been for some time. We know he's a former professional footballer, but now presents on Match of the Day and some of those big football matches like FA Cup finals and so on. But there are plenty of names in there. Some new names, interestingly, though, who have come on there. Rick Edwards, he's now presenter on 5 Live breakfast programme. But there have also been some increases for some stars, for including Victoria Derbyshire, who's increased by £50,000 to £295,000. Justin Webb from Radio 4, £25,000 to £280,000. And Rachel Burden has risen her salary to £195,000. So some eye-watering figures there.
And there are some BBC stars that we instantly think of, like Tess Daly, for example, Michael McIntyre. They're not on the list. Just explain to us why they're not on it.
Yeah, so those are just a few names. We can have some other stars from places like EastEnders, Casualty and so on, but that's part of the commercial side of BBC. They look after that and they work with other production companies, so they may earn those kind of figures, but we don't get to see them.
They're not direct BBC salaries as such.
Exactly, so you don't see them in this annual report.
OK. And, of course, we've got this big debate going on about public service pay and what people are being paid in terms of increases. Have we got any indication, roughly, well, what the figures are like compared to last year? I mean, have they had, you know, 10% increases, for instance?
Well, when it comes to pay, it's not everybody who's received pay rises, and it all depends.
It's not across the board as such?
No, it's not across the board, so it depends on the programming they do. So some presenters will be on 4 or 5 days a week, and others maybe just 1, and they may have lots of other different projects.
And chop and change programmes.
Exactly. So there's been a lot of changes, and some of those presenters, for example, Steve Wright, who we see on there, he left his show in September. So although he's reflected on there, he's no longer there in the same way that he was on Radio 2 during the weekday.
Just getting a few bob for Sunday show. Yeah.
Exactly.
Theo, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's get some response now. Joining us is the head of campaigns at the Taxpayers Alliance, Elliot Keck. Elliot, I guess you've been going through the figures as well. What's your response?
Good afternoon. Well, To put it lightly, the BBC is not having a good week, but it's also taxpayers who are not having a good week because they're staring down the barrel of a significant potential increase in the licence fee next year. And that increase in the licence fee is going to go towards paying for a fairly dramatic increase in the number of BBC stars on the biggest salaries. So as your reporter noted there are BBC stars on well over £1 million. This compares to the average median salary in the UK, the people that are paying the licence fee for these stars, which is more like £28,000. So it's pretty scandalous.
Yet the Director General, Tim Davie, does say that the BBC has enjoyed an excellent year and it remains a period of change, financial pressures and great competition in the media market. We have had to make some difficult choices. We know that the BBC is needed now more than ever.
Well, I think an excellent year is, to put it very generously, I think most viewers, most taxpayers have seen the BBC mired in one controversy after another, whether it's inviting someone like Mizzy onto Newsnight or the reports that we've seen this week. I think the BBC is not going through a good time, and ultimately people that are frustrated with the BBC, people that are not happy with its programming, and people that want to opt out do not have the choice to do so because it's funded through essentially taxation, a licence fee which is mandatory. And I think the only answer is from 2027 to move to some sort of subscription service to ensure that people that don't want to pay for the BBC aren't forced to.
Yeah, should we, however, reflect when we look at the overall figures, the salaries of the top 10 highest on-air earners, notably lower than on average than last year. A majority of those making more than 400,000 in 21-22. This year, a significant number earning less than 400,000. I know it's still a huge figure, but it's come down.
Well, they'll be facing a cost of living crisis, it seems. But the overall number that are receiving over £150,000, which is a huge salary, as I said, far more than the median salary of the British taxpayer that is funding.
Yeah, but you have to pay for talent, don't you?
Pardon?
You have to pay for talent.
Well, you do have to pay for talent, and ultimately, if people think that the BBC has the sufficient talent, if people think that the BBC has the quality programming, they will, of course, choose to pay for it. That's what people do with Netflix, that's what people do with Sky. People think that shows like Succession, for example, or high-quality programming that they're willing to pay the big bucks for. And if that's going to be the case with the BBC, then so be it, but it should be put to the test.
So a commercial fight to the death, then, in terms of all broadcasters?
Well, I certainly think that there's some parts of the BBC that you could consider public service broadcasting. You might look at something like the World Service. You might look at something like Radio 4. And there's a genuine discussion to be had about whether or not those aspects of the BBC, which are very important to whether it's our soft power or to our news broadcasting, maybe do need to be funded through some sort of scheme of taxation. But the vast bulk of the BBC, something like Match of the Day, which has its Gary Lineker earning almost £1.4 million a year, despite the fact that he can't keep some of his often controversial views to himself. People that firstly may not even like football, let alone like Gary Lineker, have to pay for that absolutely exorbitant salary. And that's the sort of thing that we do need to look at commercialising.
OK.
There's quite a big debate there, Elliot, but thank you very much for joining us. Elliot Keck from the Taxpayers Alliance. Stay with us here on the live desk on GB News. We will be with NATO as it gathers in Vilnius, but President Zelensky is angry about a lack of clarity over if and when Ukraine can join the alliance. See you soon.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Alex Deakin and welcome along to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Another day of heavy showers across the country. Some big downpours in a few spots. Most of us seeing some sunny spells, so a good chance there'll be some rainbows around. Low pressure has been dominating. This weather front brought quite a lot of heavy rain across the south yesterday evening. It's been fizzling out, but still providing quite a lot of cloud. Showers already over Wales, northern England. They'll get heavier through the day, as they will across northern Scotland. Slow-moving thunderstorms here could cause some problems with a lot of rain falling in a short space of time. We should see some sunny spells developing, particularly for Northern Ireland. 20 degrees here, maybe up into the low 20s across the southeast. But for most, it feels cool with the brisk breeze, which will at least move the showers through this evening. Lighter winds across northern Scotland means the slow-moving downpours will continue here well into the night, and we'll see more wet weather returning to Northern Ireland through the night as well. But for a good chunk of England and Wales, it will turn dry and clear, temperatures mostly holding up at about 13 or 14. As for Wednesday, it's another day of sunshine and showers. It'll be a brighter start across East Anglia and the southeast. Good chance of a sunny start to Wednesday, but then the showers will get going once more, especially over northern England. Again, parts of northern Scotland. More tomorrow, probably for Northern Ireland. But a chance of a drier afternoon across Wales and southwest England. And again, temperatures mostly in the high teens and low 20s.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Well, welcome back to the live desk, and another extraordinary development in this story about the BBC presenter and the inquiries that are going on. Tim Davie, the Director General, is being interviewed by the BBC itself on radio this lunchtime and has now revealed that he, as Director General, still hasn't spoken to the presenter involved directly. We were hearing from Mark White, our correspondent, earlier. The BBC said it had only spoken to the presenter on 6th of July. It now appears that was by some management figure, not Tim Davie, the Director General.
Tim Davie says he feels that he is playing the right role in overseeing the situation. He's also been asked whether he knows categorically whether the unnamed presenter paid for the legal fees. Tim Davie says that is not information that I am party to, and he adds that the information came to him on the 6th of July and we acted swiftly.
Meanwhile, Downing Street saying the authorities should be given time to investigate the allegations surrounding the BBC presenter, of course, with the Prime Minister having earlier said that the allegations were shocking and concerning, but he'd been given reassurances from the corporation that the process was vigorous and swift. Apart from, obviously, Tim Davie, it seems, in terms of his inquiries. But we'll update you as we get more on that.
The Prime Minister is at a major NATO summit in Lithuania and will today tell world leaders to increase their military budgets to deter Vladimir Putin.
Well, Rishi Sunak backing further support for Ukraine, with indeed pressure growing on President Biden and Germany also to signal a pathway for Ukraine to join NATO. Meanwhile, President Zelensky calling it absurd that NATO had not granted Ukraine membership.
Well, joining us from the summit in Vilnius is our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, there is plenty to be discussed there, but we do know that President Zelensky is not a happy man about this timeline for NATO membership.
Yeah, he really isn't, Pip, at all. He's clearly, as you said, on his way here to Vilnius, put out that statement on Twitter, calling the decision by NATO not to fast-track his and his country's membership of this alliance as absurd. He talks about how being invited to join NATO now was a window of opportunity and that it's been left to bargain Ukraine's membership in NATO in negotiations with Russia. He said for Russia this means motivation to continue its terror, and he goes on to effectively argue that this is bad news for the alliance and for Ukraine. Now, in essence, again, there are a lot of people here who kind of agree with President Zelensky. We got a shuttle bus. If you come to these summits, you spend an awful lot of time on shuttle buses to summits like this with all the security that is involved. And plastered on those Lithuanian buses was a sign saying that while you wait for this bus, Ukraine is waiting to become a NATO member. A reminder that the Baltic states, like Lithuania, like Latvia, like Estonia, Poland as well, want to see Ukraine join NATO as quickly as possible. There are other countries, though, like the United States and France and others, who are a bit more hesitant about all of this. First of all, they would argue, and to be fair, NATO have now confirmed that the war is going to have to come to an end before Ukraine can join, even though in principle they are in favour of Ukraine joining. But also they want to sort out things like corruption and the governance of Ukraine as well. So there is divisions, not necessarily on the principle, but certainly on how, when, what the process would look like. And that is slightly overshadowing this summit, not least of all because President Zelensky is going to have to face these leaders in the next 24 hours or so.
And Darren, very quickly, give us an idea of what pressure Rishi Sunak can actually place on the US president and Germany as well, indeed, to try and get this pathway for Ukraine sort of hardened up, if you like.
Well, so the extraordinary thing is, having kind of tried to work my way through what the UK position actually is on this, I think it is actually, in many ways, quite aligned to the United States in the end. I mean, we spent a lot of time on the plane today talking to the Prime Minister about this, about the NATO summit, about Ukraine's membership. There is an acceptance from Britain that this is not going to happen anytime soon. As I say, the war is 500 days old with Russia. It is not likely to end potentially not even the next 500 days. And so I don't think there is that much division in the UK's place, but clearly he wants, and Britain wants to see the alliance firm up its support for Ukraine, because in many ways this is also a moot point. Even though, you know, obviously it would be a big moment if Ukraine joined, because effectively NATO would be at war with Russia, and that's why it's not going to happen. At the end of the day, Ukraine is being wholly supported by NATO at the moment in terms of financial support, military equipment. It is the alliance, really, that is ensuring that Ukraine has the ability to carry on its fight against Russia.
Darren in Vilnius, thank you very much indeed for updating us.
Joining us now is Peter Caddick-Adams, who is a NATO historian. Good afternoon to you, Peter. Thanks for joining us on GB News. It does sound like all these NATO countries, they're walking quite a difficult tightrope at this summit, aren't they? Because there's lots of understanding and sympathy with Ukraine's demand for that firm timetable. But the debate, it's just very, very complicated.
It's complicated because there are several different speeds at which the various NATO members are racing. Basically, if you're close to Russia, the closer you are, the more hawkish you are, and the more you would like NATO to absorb Ukraine into the alliance. But the further away you go, where the threat seems less imminent, United States, certainly the United Kingdom, France, there is more of a measured tone that Ukraine needs to sort out its governance, its ideas of corruption, and therefore that will take time. And of course, overriding this is the famous Article 5, which states that an attack on one NATO nation is an attack on all of them. So if Ukraine comes straight into NATO, that puts NATO at war with Russia, which is what no one wants. And so that really is the major stumbling block at this moment in time.
And of course, I guess that goes forward even into if a ceasefire was established. You know, if Ukraine's admitted into NATO during a ceasefire, would that ceasefire hold, or would Russia try and complicate matters? Because clearly a lot of signals being sent here from Vilnius to the Kremlin. Hello, Peter, can you hear us?
War. That's the whole point. The war has really got to finish before Ukraine can come into NATO. We've got to remember here, everybody is aware of this tension. This isn't something new. And what President Zelensky is very good at doing is messaging around the world and waving his flag, as indeed he should. But really, we've got to remember that these are messages for his own population, that he is reassuring the nation he's doing everything he can to ensure their future security. So these are problems that have been talked about behind the scenes for weeks and weeks and months, and there is nothing new. I mean, far more significant is the fact that Turkey has backed down and Sweden will come into the alliance as soon as possible, and that's 32 nations on the horizon now that are lined up, and makes Russia's job even more difficult, and the security of Europe far more firm than it was before.
Indeed, and we've just seen that handshake between the Prime Minister and Turkey's President there in Vilnius. Peter, thank you very much for updating us. Of course, we'll keep updating people from that NATO summit. Thank you.
Well, let's just bring you a little bit of breaking news, because the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his wife Carrie have welcomed their third child. And Carrie has posted on her Instagram saying, "A week of Frankie. Welcome to the world, Frank Alfred Odysseus Johnson, who was born on the 5th of July at 9:15 a.m. She jokes, "Can you guess which name my husband chose?"
Frank. Plenty more to come. Here are the headlines with Aaron.
Hi there, it is 1:34. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. The BBC's Director General says the suspended presenter has been spoken to by a very senior management, but that he has not spoken to the unnamed presenter himself. In an interview with the BBC's Radio 4, Tim Davie said he didn't think it was odd. The presenter was only contacted last Thursday.
What was his response when he was spoken to? Has he denied it?
I'm not going to get into the specific conversations with the presenter.
Have you spoken to him?
Personally, no. He's been spoken to by a senior manager.
Has he offered to resign?
Again, that is a matter that I think we have to respect the privacy of an employee.
Except we're in a very strange situation, aren't we, in that he's not been named, but everyone in this building knows who it is. And there are an awful lot of people who you also have a duty of care to, male presenters on air, who are having to go on air to say that it's not them. It's not a sustainable situation, is it?
It is a very difficult and complex situation, and we're trying to calmly and judiciously navigate our way through quite difficult circumstances.
Well, separately, the BBC's published details of its highest paid stars as part of its annual report. Gary Lineker remains the corporation's top paid presenter, taking home more than £1.35 million. Zoe Ball's the highest paid female presenter, earning more than £980,000. And the Prime Minister's at the NATO summit in Lithuania, where leaders have been criticised for the delay in bringing Ukraine into the military alliance. President Zelensky says it would be absurd not to set a time frame for membership over the next 2 days, and uncertainty provides motivation for Russia to continue its terror. Rishi Sunak's in favour of Ukraine joining NATO, but not while the war against Russia continues. More on all of our stories on our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Quick look at today's markets for you. The pound will buy $1.2909 and 1.1747 euros. The price of gold, £1,499 and 66 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,255 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
Welcome back to the live desk. Let's update you now on the situation at the BBC. Its Director General has now admitted that he has not spoken directly to the presenter at the centre of the allegations.
Our Home Affairs correspondent Mark White has been following all the latest developments at New Broadcasting House. Mark, quite an extraordinary interview that Tim Davie has just done. The BBC interviewing the BBC.
Yes, and some key points, I think, coming out that are of interest, that are slightly different to what he was able to answer in terms of the press briefing. So he was pushed on the issue of whether the processes worked, given what we now know, which is that the family had contacted the BBC on the 18th of May initially to complain that an email was sent the next day to the family, but after getting no contact, no other email was sent, and only one phone call was made to that family, the contact number that was given to them 2.5 weeks later. Well, Tim Davies said that as far as the processes are concerned, he believes that they did work in the sense that the allegations were passed on to the corporate investigations team. Now, it's clear that the corporate investigations team, I think, with what information they had, which Tim Davie himself described as very serious allegations, perhaps should have red flagged that further up the chain with a bit more urgency. And that's what he is saying that the corporation is now looking at as a matter of urgency, those processes for assessing complaints and determining if they are of a very serious nature, like this allegation, then quickly escalating it to more senior management to get a more urgent response. Some other parts in that interview that was on BBC Radio 4's The World at 1, he was asked if he had met, as you said in your introduction, and spoken to the presenter himself as Director General, this being a very high-profile presenter, we're told. He confirmed that he hadn't. But again, he said he thought that was the right thing to do, that he was fulfilling his role as the Director General in overseeing this process, but allowing a very senior manager to speak to this presenter. The other aspect, the other issue that he was asked about is whether any other allegations had been made against this presenter. Now, on this point, he could have just said, no, I'm not aware of any, but he actually said, it would be inappropriate for me to comment on anything like that because the ongoing police investigation has brought a halt to the investigation that is taking place here at the BBC.
And Mark, very quickly, just on that aspect, just remind us again what has happened, because the Met has come in now saying it is making inquiries, and what they termed a scoping investigation. I mean, what is that exactly, do we know?
A scoping investigation or a scoping process is an initial assessment, really, of the allegations that have been made, the evidence that's there, to determine whether they think this meets the threshold for a criminal offence that may have occurred, in which case they would launch a formal investigation. But while this scoping exercise is underway, which may indeed lead to a criminal investigation, the BBC have been asked to halt their own internal investigations, as of course any potential criminal investigation has primacy.
Mark at New Broadcasting House, thanks very much indeed for updating us with the latest. More, of course, as we get it.
The ringleader of a people smuggling group is due to be sentenced today for the manslaughter of 39 Vietnamese migrants who were tragically found dead in a lorry in Essex in October 2019. The accused from Romania pleaded guilty at the Old Bailey last month.
Well, the victims, including 10 teenagers, had paid the smuggling gang for what was called a VIP journey on the lorry which had travelled to Purfleet in Essex, but they suffocated in the back of the lorry in a container. Authorities expected Dragici of having coordinated a lucrative network, describing him as a people smuggling kingpin. Well, our London reporter Lisa Hartle outside the Old Bailey. And Lisa, the sentence is expected to start in about 15-20 minutes' time.
Yeah, that's right. So Mariusz Dragici is due to be sentenced at around 2 p.m. today. As you said, last month he pleaded guilty to manslaughter of those 39 people, men, women and children whose bodies were found in the lorry trailer in Essex on the 23rd of October 2019. The bodies of the Vietnamese nationals were found in the container after they were transported by ferry from Belgium to Purfleet, and they died after running out of air in temperatures that reached 38.5 degrees Celsius. The 50-year-old and alleged leader of a people smuggling gang was detained in last August in Romania, and he was charged with manslaughter as well as conspiracy to assist unlawful immigration. Other people have been prosecuted for their parts in these deaths, and the court was previously told how the operation was a long-running one, with people smugglers set to make as much as £1 million in October 2019 alone. At June, in Dragici's trial, the prosecution said that they didn't believe believe that they found it hard to believe that he didn't make any monetary gain from this, even though they couldn't pinpoint any cash actually being handed over. The fee for the journey was said to be between £10,000 and £13,000 for the so-called VIP journey, which brought them to the UK. Something that they said that whoever was driving the lorry would have been aware that there were people in the back. Between May 2018 and October 2019, as many as 7 trips were found to be happening, though the court did hear that it was likely there were more. But it wasn't until the bodies of those 39 people, those men, women and children, 2 of whom were only 15 years old, were discovered in October 2019 that the trips came to a halt.
Lisa, thank you for the moment. Back to you, of course, as that sentencing begins shortly at the Old Bailey. Thanks very much indeed.
Our GB News Don't Kill Cash campaign is highlighting to the government the importance of keeping cash payments in society. It is currently at more than 203,000 signatures. More than 5 million adults still rely on cash in the UK, and it's used in 6 billion transactions every year, but there's strong vested interest pushing for it to be permanently replaced by debit and credit cards and other electronic payments.
Let's bring in our Yorkshire reporter, Anna Riley, who has been speaking to people about this issue. And, Anna, you've been struggling, I think, with a car park payment machine, as a lot of us do.
Definitely, Mark. For me, it's always remembering my registration when you go to pay. But yes, I'm here at York. There are 13 council car parks here in York. They all take a mixture of cash and card payments, other than this one that I'm at now, Marygate Car Park. It's the only one currently that is completely cashless, so you need your card if you're a driver and you want to come and park here. But also today, the City of York Council is looking into plans to make all of the car parks completely cashless across the city centre, and they say because that's going to save them money. They say that card-only machines are cheaper to buy and easier to maintain. They say that it also removes the risk of people trying to break in and steal money from them, and they also say it'll save money as well on saving council employees going around the car parks to remove the cash. And as well, it's demand. So last year in 2022, £15.9 million was made by the council from those 13 car parks, charging people for parking. But of that, only 12% of payments were made in cash, 39% were made via the phone, and 49% were made via card. So the council is saying it's about demand as well as to why they're looking at going completely cashless for all their car parks. And I've been out speaking to drivers here about this car park being cashless and about the wider potential plans to make more car parks here cashless. This is what they had to say.
I think my preference is we need to cater for everybody. I think we're moving too much towards a cardless culture now, where people are expected to have to carry a card or have to carry a phone, and it shouldn't be an obligation that you have to do that every single day.
I really don't carry cash anymore, not for anything at all. Everything's contactless now, so a lot of people seem to think there's something sinister behind it, but I just find it much more convenient.
There are so many things like banks closing, local post offices closing. So actually what we're doing is we're taking away all of the options that the older generation actually use and don't feel comfortable with. They don't feel comfortable with digital payments at this point in time, so I think it's absolutely critical.
To be honest, I'm not really that bothered. I rarely use cash anyway. I've always got my card, and with smartphones and watches, it's just easy to use your card and contactless, so it doesn't really bother me.
So a mixture of opinions from people here. Some people saying yes, cash is still king. We do still need the option to pay via cash, especially for the older generation. But other people still quite happy to pay via card for their parking. But I have been speaking to people about our Don't Kill Cash campaign as well. And the absolute majority of people that I spoke to did still say they think there is still a crucial need for cash in society, whether that's at a car park, at a restaurant or at a bar. So perhaps some more signatures being signed today in York.
Anna, thanks very much indeed, and good luck with the registration number. Yeah, I hope you don't get a ticket. Now, news just in, the Battle of Waterloo. One of the most famous battles in European history, but it doesn't mean it's not stopped giving up its secrets, it seems.
Yeah, a new dig at the Waterloo battlefield has uncovered 2 unrecognised features for the first time, which is giving new insights into the opening moments of the battle as French soldiers advanced on Hougoumont Farm on the morning of June the 18th, 1815. You could well have studied that at history O-level.
Oh, I remember the maps.
To call it.
Yeah, I remember the maps of the very famous farmhouse. Let's get more now with Mark Evans, Chief Executive Officer of Waterloo Uncovered, leading the dig. And you really have uncovered something, it seems, Mark.
We have. We've been very, very lucky in that we've found 2 brand new features that have previously not been spotted before. One is a chapel and one is a quarry to the south of Hougoumont Farm. We noticed them on a map, and then we did some geophysics, which is sort of radar work to see what's under the ground. And then we got in there last week with our team of archaeologists and veterans, and they've been exploring and excavating those features since, which is really helping us better understand the battle and changing history.
So what do we think will change in terms of the narrative? I mean, hopefully Napoleon still loses, does he?
Yeah, there is no fear of us changing that around, that's for sure. But what the archaeology does is it allows us to really better understand the detail and the human experience. So the features that we've found now are some way 200, 300 metres in front of Hougoumont Farm. During the battle, Hougoumont Farm was a heavily defended outpost of the British, and it was thought to be key to the battle. So the British managed to hold it against these waves and waves of French assault. And the information that we've got is really helping us understand why. This quarry that we found at the front of the farm just is another reason as to why it was so hard for the French to get there. These sort of obstacles that they had to cross before they reached the actual farm itself. And the chapel is a similar sort of thing. And they were features that the British who were defending the farm used as defensive features so that they could actually harass the French during their attack. And all these sort of things, these tactics, they're sort of things that are brought to life by the veterans that we have taking part in the excavation, who are always keen to point out that these phased defences that we're now seeing and we're now uncovering are the kind of tactics that they would have used themselves in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're really helping us understand how Wellington was an even more canny commander at the Battle of Waterloo than I think we sometimes give him credit for.
And Mark, in terms of this discovery, where does it rank, with all your other discoveries? How exciting is it?
And for historians, it's incredibly exciting. For the world at large, last year we found only the second full skeleton that you've ever found at Waterloo, and that's one of the most incredible finds we've found. This year, the finds we've found are absolutely pivotal in really understanding the detail of the battle, and they're the kind of things that. Waterloo is one of those battles. There's been a lot written about it, but until you get in and do the archaeology, you don't really have the detail and you don't really have the opportunity to understand what it was like for the people on the ground. So, like, if you now know that the approach the French made was through this quarry, then through a wood to the farm, it really helps you understand the history and put yourself in the shoes of the French when they were attacking, or the British soldiers when they were getting there. It just makes it ever more visceral.
Excellent. Mark, thank you very much for updating us. The history books will have to be rewritten because of your work. So there we are. Thanks for updating us here on GB News with that.
More on the BBC scandals still to come, including the startling revelation that the Director General has yet to speak to the unnamed presenter at the centre of the allegations. Stay with us.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Sunny spells again tomorrow and again. You will be dodging the downpour, some very heavy showers around and a fairly cool breeze. It's low pressure that continues to dominate. This one's been tracking across the country. This weather front clearing away from the southeast, but in its wake, still plenty of showers. Moving through for most on a fairly brisk breeze, but slow-moving heavy downpours across northern Scotland, bringing some torrential rain for a time. More rain will push back across Northern Ireland into southern Scotland and northern England through the night, but a good chunk of England and Wales will actually turn dry and clear, with temperatures dropping to about 13 or 14 degrees. Now, much of the Midlands, eastern and southern England will start off with some sunshine tomorrow, but there will already be a lot of cloud and showery rain over northern England and southern Scotland. It'll stay fairly wet in northern Scotland with an increasing breeze here, more heavy showers developing, and they'll also develop elsewhere for Northern Ireland, parts of England and Wales, although perhaps a bit more scattered than today, so a better chance of seeing some lengthier dry spells, better chance of seeing a bit more sunshine, but still on the cool side, especially in the breeze, temperatures around or a touch below average still. Thursday's a similar story, but not as many showers, and some areas may have a completely dry day on Thursday. Still one or two heavy ones, especially in eastern parts come the afternoon, but parts of Wales, southwest England looking at least a bit drier on Thursday.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The BBC reveals it only spoke to the presenter at the centre of allegations almost 2 months after a complaint first made. The Director General hasn't spoken to him at all.
Tim Davie also admitted the BBC only made 2 attempts to contact the family over the same period of time. Their investigation is now on hold at the request of the Met Police.
All smiles as leaders gather in Vilnius for the NATO summit, but President Zelensky not happy, calling the lack of a time frame for Ukraine joining as absurd.
Plus, the row over his tweets about migration took the BBC off air. In return, though, the corporation paid him a salary of over £1 million. Stay with us to find out who's in the money at the corporation. Before that, all your headlines with Aaron.
Very good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 2. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. Now, the BBC's Director General has admitted he hasn't spoken to the suspended presenter at the centre of recent allegations, and the corporation attempted to contact the family on just 2 occasions. The BBC has paused its investigation while police look into possible criminal activity. In an interview with Radio 4, Tim Davie said he didn't think it was odd the presenter was only contacted last Thursday, despite a complaint being made in May.
What was his response when he was spoken to? Has he denied it?
I'm not going to get into the specific conversations with the presenter.
Have you spoken to him?
Personally, no. He's been spoken to by a senior manager.
Has he offered to resign?
Again, that is a matter that I think we have to respect the privacy of an employee.
Except we're in a very strange situation, aren't we, in that he's not been named, but everyone in this building knows who it is. And there are an awful lot of people who you also have a duty of care to, male presenters on air, who are having to go on air to say that it's not them. It's not a sustainable situation, is it?
It is a very difficult and complex situation, and we're trying to calmly and judiciously navigate our way through quite difficult circumstances.
Separately, the BBC's published details of its highest paid stars as part of its annual report. Gary Lineker remains the corporation's top paid presenter, taking home more than £1.35 million. Zoe Ball is the highest paid female presenter, earning more than £980,000. The Prime Minister's at the NATO summit in Lithuania, where leaders have been criticised for the delay in bringing Ukraine into the military alliance. President Zelensky says it would be absurd not to set a time frame for membership over the next 2 days, and uncertainty provides motivation for Russia to continue its terror. Well, Rishi Sunak's in favour of Ukraine joining NATO, but not while the war against Russia continues. Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg says Ukraine will be given security guarantees.
I also expect that allies will send a clear and positive message on the path forward towards membership for Ukraine. I have proposed a package of 3 elements with more practical support with a multi-year program to ensure full interoperability between the Ukrainian forces and the NATO forces. This will move Ukraine closer to NATO.
The government's attempting to get its illegal migration bill through the House of Commons after making a number of concessions. The changes include limiting the detention periods of unaccompanied children and pregnant women. And the legislation will no longer be used retrospectively against people already in the UK. The changes have been recommended by peers after the draft bill suffered 20 defeats in the House of Lords. Mortgage rates have hit their highest rate in 15 years, surpassing figures seen in the aftermath of last year's mini-budget. The average rate on a 2-year fixed deal is now 6.66%. That's the highest level since the financial crisis of 2008. The Bank of England raised its benchmark rate to 5% last month in an effort to bring down inflation. However, the pace of wage growth has risen again, prompting fears of a further hike in interest rates next month. Average weekly pay is 7.3% higher in the 3 months to May compared with last year, matching the joint highest figures since records began in 2001. The Office for National Statistics also revealed unemployment rose unexpectedly over the quarter to 4%. Castor Semenya has had some good news from the European Court of Human Rights. They've ruled the two-time Olympic champion has been discriminated against by World Athletics. The 800-metre runner has a condition which means she produces higher levels of testosterone. She was banned from competing after refusing to take drugs that would lower her testosterone levels. The court ruled this violated her human rights and she was not given sufficient safeguards when she complained. And train fares could be reduced under a plan to encourage more competition on Britain's railways. New research says allowing multiple operators to run services on the same line will lead to better services, newer trains and cheaper fares. Rail Partners, which represents private companies, is calling for open access to allow more train networks to compete for customers, the same way it happens in many European countries. That's it for the moment. We'll have more in our later bulletins here on GB News. But now it's back to Mark and Pip.
Aaron, thanks very much and welcome back to the live desk with the latest twists and turns in the BBC presenter saga, with the Director General admitting he has yet to speak to that presenter alleged to have paid a young person for sexually explicit photos. Tim Davie also revealing no member of the BBC management team had spoken to the presenter about the allegations for almost 2 months after the first complaint, with the conversation only happening then on July the 6th.
Our Home Affairs correspondent Mark White has been following all the latest developments. He is at New Broadcasting House. Mark, so Tim Davie giving that interview, effectively the BBC interviewing the BBC, and he said he doesn't think it's odd that he has not spoken to the presenter, the unnamed presenter, about this. Many people would beg to differ. I mean, this scandal is unfolding on his watch.
Yeah, well, he says that he believes that he is actually fulfilling his role as the Director General, that he is overseeing this investigation, and that it was appropriate, he believes, then for a very senior manager to speak to the presenter at the centre of the allegations. But yes, a lot of questions for the BBC to answer now in light of what has been revealed today in terms of that timeline, a timeline that confirms that a complaint was first made on the 18th of May, that initially an email was sent out by the corporate investigation team to the complainant a day later, but then 2.5 weeks passed before someone from that investigation team then telephoned the complainant. That number failed to connect, and then no further attempt at communicating with the complainant occurred until the Sun article on the 6th of July, or at least the notification from the Sun that they were going to be publishing the article on the 7th of July. And it was at that point, and only at that point, despite Tim Davie acknowledging that there was a very serious allegation being made here, it was only at that point that the Sun contacted them, that they then spoke to this presenter here at the BBC. And as you say, as you said to me at the beginning there, yes, he confirms that he himself has not spoken to the presenter. He was also asked whether there were any other allegations that had been made against this presenter, and he effectively sideswerved that question. He said that it would be inappropriate to comment on that particular issue because of the potential of an ongoing police investigation. They have suspended their internal investigation until that police process has ended. He was speaking on the BBC's World at One programme on Radio 4. We have reached out to the BBC asking for an interview ourselves with the Director General. That has not been forthcoming. In the absence of that, we can bring you part of that interview with Radio 4, where he acknowledges that there are some questions and perhaps improvements that need to be made in the way that they deal with these very serious allegations. This is what he said.
Only 2 attempts made to contact the family, one by email, one by phone. Does that seem fine to you?
I think one of the things I said today is I think that is a fair question. And as Director General, I want to make sure and look at a couple of things, actually. The first thing is immediately, do we raise the red flags quick enough on complaints of this nature? And the second is the processes and protocols. There may well be some learnings from this case. The one thing linked to your introduction is the case was kept open. So that does not mean we'd finished. We have a process where we keep going back, we leave a bit of time, and then we go back. So the case was kept open.
Left an awful lot of time when you consider that was from, what, the 18th, 19th of May through to last Thursday.
Well, as you can see from the timeline, they were contacted, there was no response. We can debate how many times that should have happened, but the allegations were taken seriously.
OK, do you think it's odd that the presenter was only spoken to last Thursday?
Not because, no, because what has happened is simple, is that
And what was his response when he was spoken to? Has he denied it?
I'm not going to get into the specific conversations with the presenter.
Well, an update from Scotland Yard now, I think that's worth bringing to you, a confirmation of what Tim Davie was saying about the internal investigation. Here they say that we have asked the BBC to pause its own investigation while we continue our assessment to establish whether there is evidence of a criminal offence being committed. Now, they say that assessment is being led by detectives from the Met's Specialist Crime Command and follows a virtual meeting that took place between Scotland Yard detectives and personnel here at the BBC yesterday. Now, they stress at the end of this very short statement there remains no police investigation at this time. Now, that doesn't mean that in the fullness of time there won't be an investigation, but they just want to stress that at this moment in time they have not yet launched a criminal investigation.
Mark, thank you very much indeed for updating us on that. More, of course, as we get it in those twists and turns.
Let's head to Lithuania because the Prime Minister is at a NATO summit telling world leaders to increase their military budgets to deter Vladimir Putin.
Rishi Sunak backing further support for Ukraine, recommending that all members spend 2% of their GDP on defence, which is, of course, their undertaking for NATO membership. Currently, though, only 1 in 3 NATO leaders are actually keeping to that. And it all comes as Turkey's President, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, announced he will be dropping his veto of Sweden's entry to the alliance. Meanwhile, President Zelensky calling it absurd that NATO had not granted Ukraine quicker membership.
Joining us from the summit in Vilnius is our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. A very strongly worded statement from President Zelensky, who says the delay is providing Russia with the motivation to continue its terror.
Yeah, indeed, and his argument is that he fears that NATO membership, Ukraine's membership of NATO, will be on the table if and when we get to negotiations with Russia. His fear is that it will be given away as a bargaining chip to potentially to bring the conflict to an end. That is why he's saying it's absurd not to have a timetable for Ukraine's accession to the NATO alliance. Frankly, he may well be right about that. We don't know, but he's pretty angry, and he's on his way here to Vilnius, and he's going to have, he says, a pretty frank discussion with NATO leaders on that very, very issue. He clearly is quite upset, using the word absurd to describe it in all. Leaders here, though, would say, hold on a minute, we are committed to not just supporting Ukraine, but also to providing military support for years potentially to come, and that in principle Ukraine will be able to join NATO. The problem is, they said that back in 2008, and nothing much has changed. And there are slight divisions, it must be said, within the NATO alliance. Certainly here in Lithuania, they want to see Ukraine join as soon as possible. The buses are on the way. The media buses that take us to this venue have got a sign on them saying that while you wait for this bus, Ukraine is waiting to become a NATO member. There is much more hesitancy, it must be said, in places like the United States and France, who frankly do not want to see this war potentially escalate. And that's the big issue at the centre of all this, the reason that Ukraine will not be able to join NATO anytime soon, because If it did, and that war with Russia was still carrying on, well, in theory then, more than theory, in reality, you would have to activate Article 5, which means that NATO would then be at war with Russia. So there are these divisions. We'll see what happens tomorrow when President Zelensky is physically in the room with these world leaders. But they are determined, they say, to carry on the military support of Ukraine for however long it takes, as the Prime Minister would put it.
Yeah, we're told Zelensky has actually landed, so he might be there fairly shortly. But I'm just looking at the language that Rishi Sunak used, and of course you were on the plane going over with him, wanting full membership reaffirmed, keen to try and get this over the line. How much is he going to push President Biden on this?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that Britain has been at the forefront of trying to argue, along with the Baltic states and Poland, that support from NATO should be as strong as possible when it comes at Ukraine. Now, that does not mean that the UK is at the position of trying to say that, you know, it should be allowed to join NATO tomorrow. On that very issue, the UK and the US clearly are on the same page. And while the US have been hesitant, let's not forget this, they have supported and provided the lion's share of munitions and weapons and training, if you like, to Ukrainian troops. So I think it would be wrong to say that the United States in its current form is not supporting Ukraine to a large degree. But there is also, and you remarked upon this a little bit earlier on, there is also kind of an element of good news, if you like, from NATO leaders, as they would see it, in the sense that they managed to convince President Erdogan, Turkey is a NATO member, to finally back down when it comes to Sweden's membership of NATO. They will join the alliance pretty quickly. Quite an extraordinary move, given the fact that Sweden has been effectively neutral since the Second World War. So there has been progress here, and there will be announcements of further military support for Ukraine. But, as you say, President Zelensky has now landed, so we'll have to see how far and how tough he gets in his language to those world leaders.
Darren in Vilnius, thank you very much indeed for that.
Joining us now is former Chief of Staff to Joe Biden, Susan Platt. Good afternoon, Susan. Thanks for talking to us on GB News. What's your response, though, to President Zelensky's view that it's absurd that no time frame has been set for Ukraine to join NATO? Do you think there should be more of a time frame?
Well, good morning and thank you. I think I agree with our president, obviously, and I think your prime minister, where we do have to take things one step at a time. I'm not a foreign policy expert, but if Article 5 goes into effect, then we would all be at war with Russia, and I don't think that's anything we need to be doing at this moment. The U.S. has done everything they can in support of the war in Ukraine against Putin's army, and will continue to do that. I think there's time for everything, and I think it's great that we now have really a pretty much of a brick wall by including Finland and Sweden. Thank you to Mr. Erdogan joining in the NATO alliance against Russia. So I think in due time it will happen, and I understand Mr. Zelensky's position, but I think we need to take it step back a little bit.
But perhaps stress lines too with London on this. Indications perhaps Rishi Sunak wants to go further and faster, and of course a disagreement on the use of cluster weapons. Now, why is it that Joe Biden and the Pentagon and the White House are so keen to advance cluster bombs and cluster munitions?
Well, he said it was a difficult decision that he made. But it was clearly something that President Zelensky asked for, that believes he's needed. And I believe that President Biden and our military believe it's something that could aid in the war against Russia. And that's why they're doing it.
Is it because indications that the supply of ordinary munitions, artillery shells and so on is actually drying up?
Well, I can't imagine that it is in the United States. Maybe it's getting a little short supply in Ukraine, but certainly the United States is not going to leave ourselves shy of those weapons, but I'm sure we'll have plenty to send both ways.
Yeah. Now, the other aspect is how much will President Biden have to reassure all these NATO figures of a long-term commitment to Ukraine? Because, of course, in the States, there is now this question mark, what happens if there's a change in the administration, the Republicans come in? They are certainly not wedded to the idea of supporting Ukraine there further.
Well, I think leadership matters. And I think Joe Biden has shown his leadership on this issue. I think the Republicans are just so busy circling in their three-ring circus around Donald Trump and his legal problems and his other issues that right now the American people are behind Joe Biden, and I think we all agree that we need to do all we can to support Ukraine.
And are the American people behind Ukraine? That's the big question, of course.
I think the American people are at the moment.
But
I think we've seen great... But Vladimir Putin clearly is in a very vulnerable situation right now. And we want to keep the pedal to the metal so that he stays that way.
Is there a chance, though, that attention could very soon shift to the Pacific?
I don't know that. I can't tell you that. I don't know. We'll just have to see.
OK. Susan, thank you for joining us there in Virginia. And, of course, we'll see what emerges at that summit in Vilnius a little later. We're expecting an update in the communiqué. We'll update, of course, as we get more.
Coming up very soon, you cannot keep the BBC out of the news. We will have all the details of stars' salaries. That's come out in the last few hours. Stay with us.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GBNews.
I'm Alex Deakin and welcome along to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Another day of heavy showers across the country. Some big downpours in a few spots. Most of us seeing some sunny spells, so a good chance there'll be some rainbows around. Low pressure has been dominating. This weather front brought quite a lot of heavy rain across the south yesterday evening. It's been fizzling out, but still providing quite a lot of cloud. Showers already over Wales, northern England. They'll get heavier through the day, as they will across northern Scotland. Slow-moving thunderstorms here could cause some problems with a lot of rain falling in a short space of time. We should see some sunny spells developing, particularly for Northern Ireland. 20 degrees here, maybe up into the low 20s across the southeast. But for most, it feels cool with a brisk breeze, which will at least move the showers through this evening. Lighter winds across northern Scotland means the slow-moving downpours will continue here well into the night, and we'll see more wet weather returning to Northern Ireland through the night as well. But for a good chunk of England and Wales, it will turn dry and clear, temperatures mostly holding up at about 13 or 14. As for Wednesday, it's another day of sunshine and showers. It'll be a brighter start across East Anglia and the southeast. Good chance of a sunny start to Wednesday, but then the showers will get going once more, especially over northern England. Again, parts of northern Scotland. More tomorrow, probably for Northern Ireland. But a chance of a drier afternoon across Wales and southwest England. And again, temperatures mostly in the high teens and low 20s.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GBNews.
Welcome back to the Live Desk. Plenty on the BBC today because they've also released their annual report today, including the pay of their top talent.
Gary Lineker has topped a list of the BBC's best paid stars for a 6th year in a row, earning £1.35 million in the last financial year.
Well, our South East England reporter Ray Addison has been looking enviously at the list, as we all have, I think. There's some pretty eye-watering figures, aren't there?
Yeah, it's massive. I mean, for the top 10 alone, we're looking at a maximum total of up to 5.6 million divided by the 10. You mentioned Gary Lineker. This is his 6th year in the number one spot, Match of the Day presenter, of course. He's the only star to actually earn more than 1 million at the BBC, although, of course, I have to caveat that by saying the commercial arm of the BBC may end up paying presenters and actors more than that, but that information isn't actually disclosed. But I sort of did a little bit of adding and division. It would cost 8,500 licence fee payers to pay for Gary's salary, 1.355 million.
And how does it compare to what the Director General is on? Because we only asked the question because he's been all over the BBC today.
Yeah.
How does his salary compare to his stars?
Yeah, well, he's on 528,000, so that would put him in 3rd place if he was added into this.
Between
this
Zoe
10.
Ball and Alan Shearer.
Absolutely,
Well, top talent.
Absolutely,
right.
Just below Zoe Ball. And that's, it's a pretty eye-watering sum in its own way.
Yeah, and the other aspect, of course, is given the cost of living crisis, all the debate about public service salaries and the fight of inflation. Have we got an indication as to how the figures compare this year to last year?
Well, we know that the average salary is down compared to last year. Now, the majority of people in the last top 10 earn more than 400,000. Now, 5 people earn less than 400,000 this year. So 400,000 rather this year. So it is decreasing. In terms of some of the biggest increases that we've seen, in at 10 we've got Sophie Rayworth. She's on up to £370,000. That's a 60k. Increase for her. Lauren Laverne's seen an increase of 10k. Ken Bruce, 5k increase. And Hugh Edwards as well has gone up 25,000.
Right, and an indication then that there has been some housekeeping in terms of reducing the overall wage bill then?
Absolutely. I mean, we have lost some people out of the top 10 as well. We've lost Steve Wright, we lost Vanessa Feltz, she's dropped out of the top 10, and Scott Mills as well. I think Steve Wright's now literally just out of the top 10.
Because he's on just the Sunday programme.
Yeah, he's gone from daily to just on the Sunday.
And Tim Davie, Director General, says the BBC has enjoyed an excellent year.
Yeah, he says he is proud of the content that they've delivered, but he acknowledges that it is a period of change. There are financial pressures, maybe hence some of these salaries coming down, other people coming into the top 10. And he says he's had to make some difficult choices, some more difficult choices to make at the moment for him.
Absolutely, Ray. Thank you very much for explaining all that to us.
Let's bring you some breaking news getting from Lincoln Crown Court. And a man has been found guilty by a jury of the killing of a 9-year-old girl by stabbing her through the heart in broad daylight as she played in the street. This was Lilia Valutait, who'd suffered the stab into her chest as she was playing with a hula hoop at Boston in Lincolnshire in July last year. Davidas Skebas was unanimously determined to have killed her. Just 15 minutes of deliberation by the jury after a 2-day trial at Lincoln Crown Court.
Yeah, the 23-year-old had been deemed unfit to plead or face a conventional trial due to his mental health earlier this year. He wasn't at the hearing, he didn't play any part in proceedings, and he is expected to be sentenced to a hospital order later today.
Yeah, just to explain the legal process, the jury could not deliver their verdict of guilty or not guilty to murder because, of course, they could not decide whether he intended to kill because of his mental condition, but instead had to make a determination as to whether he physically committed the act of killing. Mrs. Justice McGowan, the judge, expected to sentence him to that order later today. We'll update you, of course, as we get more on that.
Stay with us here on GB News. Our Don't Kill Cash campaign and petition has passed 200,000 signatures. Coming up now, though, a news roundup with Aaron.
Hi there, it's 2:31. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. The BBC's Director General has admitted he hasn't spoken to the suspended presenter accused of paying a teenager thousands of pounds for explicit images. Tim Davie also confirmed the corporation only attempted to contact the young person's family twice after their initial complaint. The BBC's paused its investigation while police look into possible criminal activity. Mr Davie also defended the corporation's failure to address the matter with the presenter himself until last Thursday, despite the complaint being made in May, saying he didn't think that was odd. Separately, the BBC's published details of its highest paid stars, as you've been hearing, as part of its annual report. Gary Lineker remains the corporation's top paid presenter, taking home more than £1.35 million. And Zoe Boyle's the highest paid female presenter. She earns more than £980,000. The Minister for Immigration says some of the changes to the illegal immigration bill demanded by the House of Lords are little short of wrecking amendments. The government's attempting to get the legislation through the House of Commons after being forced to make a number of concessions. But Robert Jenrick is warning that criminals and smugglers will seek to exploit the UK's borders if the legislation continues to be delayed. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister's at the NATO summit in Lithuania, where leaders have been criticised for the delay in bringing Ukraine into the military alliance. President Zelensky says it would be absurd not to set a time frame for membership over the next 2 days, and uncertainty provides motivation for Russia to continue its terror. Now, the UK is in favour of Ukraine joining, but not while the war against Russia continues. More on all of our stories on our website. That's gbnews.com.
And welcome back to the Live Desk. Let's update you on the illegal migration bill and the what's described as ping-pong between the Lords and the Commons. MPs voting today on 20 changes made to that bill by the Lords after it was, well, pretty much mauled in the upper chamber.
The government has responded by offering concessions around safeguarding for children and pregnant women in an attempt to ensure the bill's passage through Parliament, including reducing immigration bail to 8 days rather than the current proposed 28. Well, our political reporter Catherine Forster joins us now. And Catherine, I think Robert Jenrick has just been speaking as well about this. And he said, he's the immigration minister, obviously, saying some changes made by the House of Lords are little short of wrecking amendments. Because they did make a lot of changes, didn't they?
Well, they tried to make 20. And I mean, let's face it, it was always going to get a very rough ride in the House of Lords where the government, the Conservatives, do not have a majority. So 20 changes. The government are going to make 4 concessions. Basically, the 10,000 people that have arrived since March are not going to be subject to these new rules that will come in retrospectively. They will kick in at the point that this bill gets royal assent, which the government is hoping will be the end of next week. And then the detention of unaccompanied children, many people have been very concerned about that. The House of Lords had wanted that to be a maximum of 24 hours. The government are saying, OK, well, with an 8-day limit, and also pregnant women, there's going to be a limit on how long they can be detained for 72 hours. What the government is not budging on is the modern slavery legislation, which they say is allowing people to game the system and use that as a loophole to get to stay here. Now, people like Theresa May, that was a flagship policy of hers, is going to be very upset about this. So there are likely to be some Conservative rebels, but the thinking is they'll get this through by the end of next week. And goodness, they need to get it through because they're having no success elsewhere.
Well, that's interesting, of course, because the Prime Minister's spokesman, Downing Street, declining to set a deadline, a hard and fast deadline for the passage of the bill because of these problems. And in terms of the bigger picture, you know, we've still got this assertion, stop the boats is working, is what the Prime Minister said. But I'm just looking at these latest figures we've had. Another 1,600 people in the boats in the last 4 days. So clearly they're not stopping.
No, and it's not very long since Rishi Sunak was saying, look, it's down 20%, this plan is working. Of course, the weather had been very, very bad, and now we're at about 13,000 this year. That's roughly where we were at this point last year. I think it's only down about 4%. So, no, they are not having much success. Of course, their argument will be, well, we are doing lots of things. I mean, we're giving 500 million to the French for a start over 3 years. The French are intercepting a lot of boats. So the government's argument is it would be even worse if we weren't doing all of these things. But, of course, to people looking on, they're still seeing hundreds and hundreds of people crossing every day. And today, of course, we get the news that the government are spending $500,000 a day on empty hotel rooms because they need to have a buffer zone in case there's a huge surge in numbers because, of course, they don't want to have a
So these are not actually people being housed, they're just empty hotel rooms?
They're just keeping them empty in case they have a rush because, of course, there was a scandal last year about the asylum, the detention centre that was massively overcrowded. So it's But, you know, this is just so expensive, $500,000 a day on empty rooms. So the Stop the Boats pledge, all Rishi Sunak's pledges are looking in doubt at the moment, but this, more than any, really. I mean, if he manages to get the numbers down in any significant way before the next election, I think that's will be the most they can hope for.
Catherine, thank you very much indeed. Let's now take you back to the Old Bailey. Sentencing there underway for the ringleader of a people smuggling group, a Romanian Marius Mihai Dragici from Romania, being sentenced for the manslaughter of 39 Vietnamese migrants. They were found dead in the back of a lorry in Essex in October 2019.
And the migrants paid the smuggling gang for a VIP journey where they were transported to the Belgian border in taxis before they were put on the lorry, which travelled to Essex. They sadly all suffocated to death in the container.
Let's get more with our London reporter Lisa Hartle, who's outside the Old Bailey. And, Lisa, an indication, of course, that there were a huge number involved after what was termed very substantial payments.
Yeah, so that sentencing is underway in the Old Bailey of Marius Dracucci right now. Last month, he pleaded guilty to the manslaughter of 39 people, men, women, children, the bodies of whom were all found in the back of the lorry container in Essex on the 23rd of October in 2019. The Vietnamese nationals were found after being transported from Belgium on a ferry to Purfleet. And of course, like you said, they died because they ran out of oxygen. They suffocated to death in temperatures as high as 38.5 degrees Celsius. Now, the 50-year-old, an alleged ringleader of a people smuggling gang, was detained by police in August last year in Romania. He was charged with manslaughter, but also under conspiracy to assist unlawful immigration. Now, other people have also been prosecuted for their parts in the deaths of those people. In 2021, 4 other men were jailed for their parts in the deaths of the victims, 2 of whom were as young as 15 years old, and 2 other men were convicted in 2020, while lorry driver Maurice Robinson and haulage boss Ronan Hughes admitted manslaughter. The court was previously told how this was a long-running operation, and in October 2019 alone, those people smugglers could have made as much as £1 million. In June, at Dracucci's trial, the prosecution said that they were disinclined to believe that he didn't make any money from this, even though they couldn't pinpoint any cash that had actually been handed over. Now, the fee for the journey, the so-called VIP journey, was between £10,000 and £13,000, bringing those people straight to the UK. Something they said the lorry drivers would have been aware of, with people being in the back of the lorry. Now, between May 2018 and October 2019, a total of 7 smuggling trips were discovered, but the court heard at the time at Dracucci's trial that there was likely more than that, and it wasn't until the bodies of those 39 people were discovered that the trips came to a stop.
OK, Lisa, thank you very much indeed. Of course, that underway. We'll be back to the Old Bailey as we hear from the judge as to what sentence is being passed down. Thank you very much.
Now, it sounds on the surface like good news. UK wages rising for millions. That's according to official figures from the Office for National Statistics. But it's not as good as it sounds, because it sparked fresh fears that inflation will remain high, with the potential for further interest rate rises from the Bank of England.
Rate of unemployment also up slightly to 4%, but still a pretty tight labour market, which may cause problems, as we heard from the Chancellor and the Governor of the Bank of England at the Mansion House speech last night. Let's get the latest now with our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. So, as we were saying, Liam, you know, on the face value, pretty good indication that the economy is robust. Unexpected resilience, I think, was the term that they used at this Mansion House speech. But the consequences are it's stoking up inflation.
We're in that kind of world where good news is bad news. You know, wages are up strongly and unemployment is historically pretty low, albeit ever so slightly up. But 4%, crikey. Remember, in the early 80s, we'd given our eye teeth for 4% unemployment when unemployment was 10 and 11 and even 12% at one stage. Look, what's going on here is the labour market is tight, as you say. There are still a lot of companies out there who want to take people on. The labour isn't always there, so wages are going up. And we can have a look at these numbers which came out from the ONS this morning. The private sector pay is up 7.7%. That's between March and May compared to March and May 2022. So it's that 3-month period, year on year. And that's the fastest on record, that 7.7% rise for private sector pay. 80% of us work in the private sector. The 20% or so of us who work in the public sector, state school teachers, NHS workers, their pay's up by a bit less, but still up by 5.8%. And that's actually the fastest for 22 years, the fastest since 2001. And this is what's spooking the Bank of England, because this points to what we call a wage price spiral. Inflation is still 8.7%. These are actually negative wage rises in real terms, but they're still chunky enough, the Bank of England worries, to push inflation up, which means more interest rate rises.
And we've had the Prime Minister and the Chancellor banging on about inflation in terms of the public sector pay deals. But a lot of economists will say, look, it's the private sector that really stokes inflation up, which is why this figure is so significant.
It's partly that, but on the other hand, Mark, public sector wages are paid for by the state, so you don't have to borrow to pay for those public sector wage increases, which of course pushes up what we call the gilt yield we've been talking about so much.
Really isn't it again?
What investors charge the government to borrow, and it's that gilt yield which then is the benchmark for those mortgage costs. And you and I were talking earlier, Pip, weren't we, a couple of hours ago, that the average 2-year mortgage now is over 6.6%.
So,
blimey, it was only 2 or 3% a few months ago.
Could rates peak at 7%? You'll be saying more than blimey if they do that, won't you?
Well, we've got to delineate between what rates we're talking about. The Bank of England's base rate is, by definition, the lowest interest rate in the economy. The government pays a bit more to borrow. The great unwashed, you and I, we pay a bit more to borrow on top of that, whether it's for a mortgage or a company loan or a personal loan or whatever. The Bank of England's currently at 5%. I think it's nailed on now with these wage increases that we're going to look at 5.25%, maybe even 5.5% when the Monetary Policy Committee, the Bank of England's group of economists, meet to decide rates. Their next meeting is the 3rd of August, Thursday, the 3rd of August. Having said that, I don't see the Bank of England going up to 6 or 6.5%. I know financial markets say that's where they're going to go. I don't buy that, because actually, I'll say it here now, I think inflation is going to come down quite sharply in the next month or two. So I actually think that 5.25, 5.5 will be the peak, which will mean the average mortgage rate will probably peak at about 6 3/4.
So
I'm not qualified to give some financial advice.
Of halving it by the end of the year, you still think could be achievable?
Well, that's the halving of inflation. Yeah, I do. I do think that could be achievable. When he said he wanted to halve inflation, that was in January, and we were at 10.7. Yeah. So he needs to get it somewhere near 5%. I think we will have inflation of about 5% quite soon. That will be nothing to do with Rishi Sunak. It will be global trends that are driving
and nothing near the 2% target which the Bank of England has. Now, the other part of the equation is what damage will be done in trying to drive down inflation. And, of course, we had this worry about some kind of recession or growth stopping dead. I mean, what are the signals we're getting on that particular bit? Because, obviously, all these rate rises take time, as you said, to feed through the system.
That's right, and that's why I think the Bank of England should stop raising interest rates now. I think it should have stopped a few months ago. It was too late to start raising interest rates, and it's going to be too late to stop raising interest rates, because now what the Bank of England is doing is just punishment beatings. Putting up the main rate of interest from 5 to 5.5%, that is really going to do damage to the economy. That's going to start closing down businesses. You're going to get some young couples who simply, tragically, can't keep hold of the home that they've worked so hard to buy. So I would say that the Bank of England now is raising rates to try and kind of regain some of the credibility that it lost when it was slow off the mark to start raising rates because it didn't spot inflation early enough. So I'm hoping, I do think there'll be a rate rise on the 3rd of August, but I'm hoping it will be the last one.
OK. Thank you very much indeed taking us through those figures. Talking of which, of course, we've got our Don't Kill Cash campaign highlighting to the government the importance of keeping cash payments in society. Currently, more than 204,000 signatures on that petition.
Liam will be very happy about that. More than 5 million adults still rely on cash in the UK, and it's used in 6 billion transactions every year. But there are strong vested interests pushing for it to be permanently replaced by debit and credit cards and other electronic payments.
Well, we left our Yorkshire reporter Anna Riley still trying to get her ticket for her car in that car park in York. Did you remember what your registration number was, Anna?
Luckily, Mark, the car's parked very close to the pay station, so yes, I can have a glance over and see and make sure that I don't get charged. But yes, we're here today at this car park, Marygate car park in York, because it's currently the only cashless car park in the city of York. The other 12 car parks here, they accept a mixture of cash and card, but currently the council today are looking at plans to make all car parks in York completely cash-free, meaning that you'll need a debit card or your Apple Pay to come and pay for parking. And they say they're doing this to save money. They say that cashless payment machines save them money and they're also cheaper to maintain. They say there's no risk with cashless machines for people trying to break into them and steal cash. And they also say it saves money as well on council employees coming to empty those machines and take that money to the bank. And it's also also about the use of cash as well. So they've looked at their figures for last year, 2022. £15.9 million was made from the charges at council car parks, but of that, only 12% of payments were made in cash. 39% of those payments were made via a phone app, and then the other 49% were made via card. So they say it's about demand as well. But I've been out speaking to people at this car park here about what they make to it being cashless and about the further plans across the city to potentially make the rest of the car parks here cashless. And this is what they had to say.
I think my preference is we need to cater for everybody. I think we're moving too much towards a cardless culture now, where people are expected to have to carry a card or have to carry a phone, and it shouldn't be an obligation that you have to do that every single day.
I really don't carry cash anymore, not for anything at all. Everything's contactless now, so a lot of people seem to think there's something sinister behind it, but I just find it much more convenient.
There are so many things like banks closing, local post offices closing. So actually what we're doing is we're taking away all of the options that the older generation actually use and don't feel comfortable with. They don't feel comfortable with digital payments at this point in time, so I think it's absolutely critical.
To be honest, I'm not really that bothered. I rarely use cash anyway. I've always got my card, and with smartphones and watches, it's just easy to use your card and contactless, so it doesn't really bother me.
So a mixture of opinions there, but a lot of people still saying even though they don't carry cash, there should still be the ability for, say, the older generation that aren't as happy using their card to have that option still at car parks like this one. And certainly a lot of people that I spoke to as well did back our Don't Kill Cash campaign, saying that they'd been adding their signature to it because they still do feel the real need for cash in society.
Thank you very much indeed, and good luck with whatever you're going to pay there. Any idea what the hourly rate actually just put you on the spot?
It is. It's £2.75 an hour, but if you've gone over 5 hours, which will be for me, £16 it'll be. So yeah, luckily I'll hopefully get that on expenses.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a lot of money for a car park, but
we'll check with the boss, Anna, that you can do
exactly.
that.
We'll all have a chip in for you. Yeah,
Fingers crossed.
Indeed. Thank you very much indeed. God, that's expensive, isn't it? Anyway.
Absolutely. Well, but it is everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah. Should we say welcome to the world to Frank Arthur Odysseus? Who he?
He is Boris and Carrie Johnson's new child, their third child, a sibling to Wilfred, who's 3, and Romy, 18 months. He was born last Wednesday, and some very cute pictures are doing the rounds at the moment.
Going to be known as Frankie for short. Which is better than Odysseus, one might think. Anyway, congratulations to them. And, of course, Mr Johnson's 8th child, Carrie's 2nd son. That's going to be a big Christmas list.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your company on the live desk this lunchtime. It's been extremely busy, hasn't it, Mark?
Indeed. Thanks for being with us. We're back tomorrow. Patrick is next.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Sunny spells again tomorrow, and again you will be dodging the downpour. Some very heavy showers around and a fairly cool breeze. It's low pressure that continues to dominate. This one's been tracking across the country. This weather front clearing away from the southeast, but in its wake, still plenty of showers. Moving through for most on a fairly brisk breeze, but slow-moving heavy downpours across northern Scotland, bringing some torrential rain for a time. More rain will push back across Northern Ireland into southern Scotland and northern England through the night, but a good chunk of England and Wales will actually turn dry and clear, with temperatures dropping to about 13 or 14 degrees. Now, much of the Midlands, eastern and southern England will start off with some sunshine tomorrow, but there will already be a lot of cloud and showery rain over northern England and southern Scotland. It'll stay fairly wet in northern Scotland with an increasing breeze here, more heavy showers developing, and they'll also develop elsewhere for Northern Ireland, parts of England and Wales, although perhaps a bit more scattered than today, so a better chance of seeing some lengthier dry spells, better chance of seeing a bit more sunshine, but still on the cool side, especially in the breeze, temperatures around or a touch below average still. Thursday's a similar story, but not as many showers, and some areas may have a completely dry day on Thursday. Still one or two heavy ones, especially in eastern parts come the afternoon, but parts of Wales, southwest England looking at least a bit drier on Thursday.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.